Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition, that the following students be appointed as pages for this, the first session of the 66th General Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island. Christina O'Hanley, Morel Regional High School. Aaron Viga, Ecole Francois Biot. Brooklyn McGuinness, Surrey Regional High School. Patience Smith, Bluefield High School. Ifra Zadi, Charlottetown Rural High School. Sophie Peterson, Colonel Gray High School. Alexis Kelly, West Isle Composite High School. Nicole Lawler, Three Oaks Senior High School. Maya Schmidt, Kensington Intermediate High School. Keaton Bushy, Montague Regional High School. Riley McWilliams, Kincora Regional High School. And Lucy Liu, Grace Christian School.
Shall I carry? Okay, the Honourable Premier?
Are we doing
The resolution of sympathy?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker, yes. Sorry. A lot of paperwork here.
I know.
Get back into the routine, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, almost 3 months ago, we lost a great Islander and community leader with the passing of Francis O'Brien, perhaps better known to most and all who knew him as Junior. He was a proud Islander, a proud family man who ably served his community and the people of Kings County as a member of the Legislative Assembly for many years. Born in 1927, Junior worked as a farmer for most of his life while helping to raise a family of 12 with his beloved wife, Rosella. As an engaged member of his community, Junior was involved with organizations such as the Knights of Columbus, the Morel Co-op, the Morel Credit Union, the Morel Chevy's Baseball Club, the Knights of Columbus, and the Caledonia Club for many years. Elected as the Assemblyman for 2nd Kings in the general election of 1982, Junior was again re-elected in the election of 1986. Active on many legislative committees, he chaired the Standing Committee on Transportation during the government of the Honourable Jim Lee. Junior will be long remembered, Mr. Speaker, for being a good constituency person who cared deeply about the people he loved. And personally, Mr. Speaker, Junior was, in my estimation, probably the greatest of all tellers of stories. He was an excellent celebrant of island characters, someone who always had a story, a line, a chuckle, and a laugh. And whether you met him at a community dinner or at a store or at the ball field, it didn't matter. Junior was always the same, a good and generous soul, and I'll miss him greatly, Mr. Speaker. And on behalf of all Islanders and the government of Prince Edward Island, I extend my deepest condolences to his family and friends and all who knew him. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I must say I appreciate the words of the Premier, particularly his generous incantation that Junior was perhaps the best storyteller ever to sit in these seats, present company accepted, of course. Although I don't think I ever met Mr. O'Brien, never had the pleasure of meeting him, I'm very aware of the fine work he did as the Assemblyman representative for 2nd Kings during the 1980s, and he did all of the things as the Premier said. And like many who preceded him, and indeed several in the House today, he was a farmer. And as the Premier also said, he had quite a herd of kids as well. He had 12 children with his wife, Rosella. And so on behalf of the Official Opposition, I want to pass on my deep condolences to the family, to the large family, and wish them all the best. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I too would like to stand and express my sympathy to the O'Brien family. And like the Leader of the Opposition, I never had the opportunity to meet Mr. O'Brien, but certainly heard some wonderful things about him, and I thank the Premier for bringing this forward. And on behalf of the Third Party, we'd certainly like to express our sympathy to the O'Brien family. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Morel Donagh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would love to just say a few quick words about Junior O'Brien. what a pillar of our community out home in the district. And of course, he preceded me by a number of years, sitting in this seat. Truest sense of the word, a gentleman, and on a number of levels. I can speak to a personal story when I was very young, and my grandfather, Clarence McEwen, was teaching me bridge, Mr. Speaker, and he would take me to the bridge play. And I was quite young, and as you can imagine, many of the folks around me were slightly, maybe perhaps 3 times my age, and Junior was one of them. And he said to me, "You have a great future if you've learned to play bridge," at that age, and had no idea, of course, that I would fill his future seat at one point too. He used to help me campaign as well, Mr. Speaker, and he always gave me the advice, you would campaign with some people and they would say, "You know what, you don't need to go to that door. We already know how they vote. You don't need to go to that door." And Junior was his advice to me was, remember, it doesn't matter what their political stripe are. You help them out. They're a constituent of yours. You help out everybody you possibly can. And he always made sure we went everywhere. His family is just simply wonderful. We're certainly going to miss him in the community. Our full respects to the entire family. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak? The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I just, in my quick desire to want to speak to Junior, I forgot to actually go through the actual reading of our motion. So I think, if nothing else, Junior deserves for us and his family to read into the record. So, if I could, Mr. Speaker, with your indulgence, that I move, seconded by the Leader of the Official Opposition, the following resolution of sympathy. Whereas Mr. Francis Junior O'Brien, former member of the Legislative Assembly for 2nd Kings, passed away on August 15th, 2020, therefore be it resolved that this House recognise the contributions made by the late member, Mr. Francis Junior O'Brien, to this province. Mr. Speaker.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, it is also my great pleasure to move, seconded by the Leader of the Opposition, the following resolution of sympathy. Whereas Ms. Nancy Guptill, former member of the Legislative Assembly for 5th Prince and St. Eleanor Summerside, and Speaker of the Legislative Assembly from 1993 to 1996, passed away on August 24th, 2020. Therefore, be it resolved that this House recognise the contributions made by the late member, Ms. Nancy Guptill, to this province. So, Mr. Speaker, I just would like to add a few words of remembrance to Nancy, because as we all know in this legislature on August 24th, we lost an incredible person, an incredible community leader, and a most compassionate Islander. Nancy Guptill had a long and storied career as a member of the Legislative Assembly, where her passion for politics and public service were always on full display. While serving as the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly in 1993, as we all know, she was part of a unique moment in Canadian political history as one of 5 women who simultaneously held the 5 most influential legislative government positions in Prince Edward Island. Premier, Leader of the Official Opposition, Speaker and Deputy Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, and Lieutenant Governor, a feat yet and sadly yet to be repeated in Canadian public life. Nancy and her family made Prince Edward Island home in 1975, where she worked in the field of healthcare as a radiotherapist and raised her family with her late husband, Greg. Nancy first served on Summerside, what was then Summerside Town Council, for many years before being elected as the member of the Legislative Assembly for 5th Prince in a by-election in 1987. She was re-elected in the general elections of 1989, 1993, and 1996, holding several cabinet portfolios during that time, including Minister of Tourism and Parks, Minister of Labour, Minister responsible for the status of women, and Minister responsible for human rights before being elected Speaker of the Legislative Assembly. Nancy was also among a handful of members of the Legislative Assembly who were elected both under the dual and the single-member districts, Mr. Speaker, in our province. And following her career in active politics, she later served as the chair of the Workers' Compensation Board of Prince Edward Island. Nancy Guptill was by all means a leader, a trailblazer, and an inspiration to many Islanders. She had a deep sense of community and an unwavering passion for empowering Islanders, especially women, to become leaders. More importantly, she was a devoted mother and grandmother, who will be forever missed by her loved ones and her friends. And Mr. Speaker, Nancy was a friend to all, me included. Her and Greg were attendees at the wedding of Jana and I in 1989. Her granddaughter Blair was our flower girl. She was always so gracious, kind, and supportive. Always had a caring ear, Mr. Speaker, and such a big and warm, loving heart. And it's with the greatest of sympathies that I extend all of her condolences to Nancy's family on behalf of the Legislative Assembly of Prince Edward Island. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and yet again, I want to echo the comments of the Honourable Premier and his remarks regarding Nancy. Nancy, as the Premier said, was one of the famous five, that unique and momentous time in Ireland and Canadian history, actually. And if you look at the book, which was just recently launched, actually a couple of weeks ago, and I had the pleasure, along with the Premier and several other members of this legislature, being present for that book launch celebrating the famous five. The opening quote in the book on the section dedicated to Nancy says this, and it's a quote of hers: "I was thoughtful about what I did. I think I did things with kindness, with purpose, and with hard work." And I mean, what a wonderful set of principles to live your life by. And I hope we can all try to emulate that. The odds were not with Nancy to achieve the positions that she did. She came from away. As the Premier said, she grew up in Nova Scotia and didn't move to the island until she was a young adult. She was a woman. And back then, those are significant barriers to becoming elected to this assembly. In fact, they still aren't to some extent. But Nancy overcame that with hard work, with her volunteerism, her love of people, and her desire to help them. And like so many other strong women that I know, Nancy's role model for that lay within her own family, her mother, Evelyn, who was determined and hardworking and kind. And as Nancy says in the book, she had not a hard bone in her body, which is a lovely phrase. I don't think Nancy harbored any great political ambitions. In fact, the chapter in the book says as much. Nancy, I think, was just happy to be part of the community and to help people. So when she arrived in Baddeck and she was invited into the community, she accepted that invitation, but it wasn't strategic, it wasn't planned. She didn't, again, have any strong ambitions, I think, to succeed in politics. She was simply a kind person, and I think that was an extension of her generous spirit and her community-minded aptitude. So I was honored to have met Nancy on a number of occasions, and I got to see firsthand that smart and beautiful woman, and also her commitment to kindness. She may have been a reluctant politician, but she was an instinctively generous citizen, committed to improving the lives of her fellow islanders. And for that reason, I think she found a natural home in island politics as a politician here. So my condolences and sympathies to Nancy, and particularly my friend, her daughter Nancy Beth, who is, again, a wonderful example of what it means to be involved in island politics. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it certainly gives me an honor to rise and speak to this motion. As the Premier said, and the Leader of the Opposition, you know, Nancy Gupta was a trailblazer, and she was a very hardworking lady and a very kind lady. And a lot of us relied on her for advice, and she always gave good advice and good, truthful advice. And, you know, as the Honourable Leader of the Opposition said, you know, she moved here from another province, was well embraced here in PEI because of her kindness and who she was, and we tend to do that as Islanders. You know, she did run in a time where, you know, it was hard for ladies to get into politics. She did a wonderful job, and to be a member of the famous five and to go down in history is quite an accomplishment for all ladies here on PEI. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly want to send my condolences to the family on behalf of the Third Party and myself. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Summerside-Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise to speak to this motion. I don't have remarks prepared for this, but I would be remiss to not stand up and speak about Nancy Guptill. I did not know her personally, Mr. Speaker, but I don't think there's anyone in Summerside who doesn't feel like they know the legend of Nancy Guptill. She was notoriously kind, notoriously smart. She had strong leadership skills. I also had the pleasure of attending the Famous Five presentation recently for the book launch, and I actually just finished reading the chapter about Nancy Guptill not all that long ago. And one thing that really stood out to me was on the day that the legislature dealt with the bombing, Nancy was the Speaker of the House at that time, and there was, of course, no training on what you're supposed to do. You can only imagine, Mr. Speaker, what it would be like to be the person sitting in that chair in that moment without any preparation, without any idea of what she was supposed to do. She immediately took control of that situation. She worried about her colleagues. She made plans. She directed people and stayed in the building until she was sure all of her colleagues were out of it. Like a leader, I think that Nancy Guptill is exemplary. She was one of the few women who held that position, and we have a great deal of respect for her. So while I didn't know her personally, I do know her daughter, and I send my deepest condolences to their family. Her daughter has a lot of those same attributes. So thank you for the opportunity to speak, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to rise and speak to this motion because I believe Nancy Guptill, as we've heard, left truly an amazing and lasting legacy, not the least of which, of course, is her family and her daughters, Krista and Nancy Beth, who we've heard, and her daughter Peggy, and of course her grandchildren, Blair, Jamie, and Keegan. Her daughter Peggy has been a friend of mine for around 15 years now, and little did I know Peggy would move in next door to me in the last few years. And her and her husband Jeff and her daughter Jamie. And Jamie's quite involved with the watershed in the Trout River group, and that's her passion. And just like Nancy, her family is continuing her legacy and giving back. And so I wanted to express my condolences and sympathies to them, especially Peggy and Jeff and Jamie. But also I wanted to recognize that in April of this year, they also lost their father. And so it's been a very difficult and challenging year for them, in particular in these times of COVID. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just want to stand and speak to this motion for a brief second. And you look at icons in the province of Prince Edward Island, and you need not look much further than Nancy Guptill. And she's done so much for our province. I was lucky enough to attend their funeral, and I know it was during COVID, and I know the situation that the family was under, trying to say goodbye under these circumstances, and they did a wonderful job. And I'm sure that funeral could have been 10 times as many people there. That's the impact that she had. And I too, along with the minister, Peggy was my next door neighbor at one point. So I want to say hello to Peggy and Jamie and Jeff, and as well as Nancy Beth at this time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? No? Charlotte Carey. Okay, we'll move on to recognitions of guests. The Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad that we are all back and we're able to do so safely. I'd like to welcome you back to the legislature for the fall session, Mr. Speaker, all of my colleagues in here. Our pages, it's so great to have our pages back with us. It's a little bit more normalcy in a world that seems anything but some days. And of course, to our members of the media and all those who are watching at home, welcome back. It's been a lot of change, I guess, as we've already highlighted personally and professionally. We've been through a lot. We've had some loss and we've had some gains. And I don't want to steal the thunder from the honourable member from Summerside and his wife, but I know they're going to be having some big news too. So that's all exciting, Mr. Speaker, and it certainly makes what we're doing in here all that much more important. Yesterday I had a great privilege to join my colleagues from Summerside at the Remembrance Day service in the city, Mr. Speaker, and it was amazing. What a wonderful day it was. And what a great celebration during difficult times. I did have a time to chat with 95-year-old Jim Evans, who's part of the North Nova Scotia Highlanders Battalion, Mr. Speaker. We had a great chat, and thanked Jim for his service, and he told me about what an important day November 11th is for him each and every year. I also then took my son Cal down to Georgetown, and we walked through the Pathway of Heroes display in the A.A. MacDonald Memorial Gardens in Georgetown, paying tribute to all of the soldiers from that region, Mr. Speaker. I had 4 uncles, Uncle Jack and Lloyd King, Willie Stevens, and Charles McConnell, who were in the military, Mr. Speaker, and my Uncle Lloyd was part of the Royal Winnipeg Rifle Battalion, Mr. Speaker, who stormed the beaches of Normandy in 1944. So certainly proud of them and the legacy that they left behind and the freedoms that they have given all of us. I too would like to offer my congratulations to the Minister of Transportation and Cheryl for the arrival of quite a handful, I think, to say the least, but they're happy and healthy and so grateful that they're here, and I wish you the best of luck in that. I also want to say a special thank you, Mr. Speaker, to our frontline healthcare workers and teachers and students and all the professionals in the education field who are doing amazing work under difficult times, Mr. Speaker, trying their very best to keep us safe and to get back, as I say, on that road to some kind of normal. And I salute them for their amazing work. They are, I've said it 100 times, but it deserves saying again that I think they're the best of all of us. And so thank you to them. And finally, Mr. Speaker, just as we begin the fall session, I would just like to remind all of the MLAs in here, not that we need reminding, but on behalf of all the Islanders that are watching, that the way we have conducted ourselves in this legislature over the past number of sessions has made us the envy of not just legislatures and parliaments across the country and beyond, but all who pay attention, Mr. Speaker. And when you look at events that are taking place around the world and south of the border, you know, we have so much here to be grateful for. And that envy isn't something that we should take for granted in here, and it certainly isn't something that happens by accident. So we will have differences of opinion in here, Mr. Speaker, as we should, and we will have different approaches, and we will have difficult questions and answers that will frustrate, I'm sure. But let's continue to do it as we have been doing it respectfully, earning that pride that Islanders are so glad to see. And let's just continue to treat each other the way we deserve to be treated, and remember that we're not just representing ourselves and our families and our communities here, but we're representing all Islanders, Mr. Speaker, and it's a great privilege for all of us to be here. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker, and I too would like to welcome everybody back to this legislature. And I mean, that was a summer and a fall like no other, and beautiful weather-wise, but spectacularly challenged in all kinds of other ways. And I want to also thank those many essential frontline workers who enabled so many of the services on which Islanders rely to be maintained on a regular basis throughout the last 8 months. I also want to commend Islanders themselves generally on their continued commitment to each other, to our communities, to our friends and neighbours. And it's through that ongoing commitment that we have managed to weather this storm of COVID as well as we have. As Dr. Morrison says, COVID is knocking at our door, and inevitably at some point it is going to make its way in here. It already has on a number of occasions. And it's that vigilance from Islanders and their determination to stand beside and up for each other which has allowed us to be as successful as we have. So thank you to all Islanders for your contribution to that. COVID, of course, has shut down so many things, some things that even stayed active during wartime. And the Premier made mention of Remembrance Day yesterday, so it was particularly disconcerting that on the day that we remember war, that there was disruption to that service. And I had the honour and pleasure of attending a number of services throughout my district and in the area in which I live. And although the numbers may have been reduced and the services not what they typically are, I can tell you that the emotions and the dedication of those who were present was not diluted in any way whatsoever. That was as present and as forceful and touching as it ever was. I want to thank the workers who completed the extensive renovations to this building. You will not be aware of that looking, although you are looking through some pretty snazzy, fancy new cameras. I'm not sure if that's evident at home, whether the quality of the video is any better. But huge renovations went on in this building over the last few months, at which time all of our offices were closed. And I want to thank the workers who completed that work, all of the tradespeople who were in here working so hard. And many of us came in during that time and were fully aware of the extent of the work that was required. I also want to thank the staff the staff from our legislative offices who soldiered on through that, despite how difficult it is to maintain contact with your caucuses during a time when, you know, we put in a lot of hard work between sessions to be able to stand here today and do the work that we have to do. So I want to send a special thank you out to the opposition staff, but also, I'm sure, on behalf of all legislators here, the staff that support them. I also want to thank the cleaning staff who are back here, again, making sure that we're safe and healthy. There are a few things I also want to mention. The Premier has already said this, but the Minister of Transportation and his partner Cheryl, congratulations to you on your new twins, and to Mila and Arthur, welcome to this lovely world. Also, the member for Cornwall Meadowbank became a grandfather recently, and I saw that he and his wife Josephine, Elizabeth had some beautiful pictures of Josephine Marie on social media recently. So congratulations to you too. Before I sit down, I want to, and Speaker, you made very touching reference to this before the doors were open and the cameras turned on. But a member of our caucus lost her father recently. A gentleman, Glenn Beaton, who was an enormous force in the civil service here on Prince Edward Island, and his fingerprints have been left in many projects in a variety of departments across the civil service and our island. He was also deeply appreciated and loved in his community of Alexandria. I know that, having spoken to so many people who live there. He made an indelible contribution to that community and indeed the whole island community. But more than that, he was a kind, kind man. I got to know Glenn fairly well over the last few years, and I was absolutely touched by somebody who, let's not forget, celebrated his 80th birthday on the same day that the campaign for which he was running to be the member for Cardigan concluded. At 80 years of age, he did not stop striving to serve his community, and I know he is deeply loved by many in that community, by his daughter, Michelle, and particularly by his granddaughter, Ava, who I know misses him acutely. So condolences to the entire family, to Mary, and to all the siblings, and he will be greatly missed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I too would like to pass on my condolences to the honourable member from Stratford Kinloch on the passing of her dad, and also my sympathies to the Honourable Minister of Social Services and Seniors for the passing of his mum. Our deepest sympathy. Also, I'd like to congratulate the Minister of Transportation, Cheryl, on the arrival of some twins, and I'm sure, as the old saying goes, you're going to have your hands full. Also, my colleague over to my right here, the Honourable Member for Cornwall Meadowbank, now we call him Grampy. So congratulations. And it's always a pleasure to rise here when we come back and welcome everybody back. And, you know, it's nice to see the pages, nice to see all our colleagues. And, you know, as the Honourable Member of the Opposition said, we can't thank the staff here enough, and our staff in our offices, for all the hard work they did, and the people that did the job here. It's wonderful what they've done. You know, we have nice offices now. They're coming to completion, and I'm sure, you know, as time goes on, they'll be here for other people, and, you know, we have a wonderful innovation here. Anyway, yesterday was a wonderful day, and I think it was a record in a lot of ways. It was a record in that with COVID, a lot of ceremonies didn't go, but some did with the permission of the Chief Public Health Office. But the weather was just unbelievable. I don't think in our lifetime we've ever saw such a wonderful day. Anyhow, that's the way things happen on PEI. I had the privilege to celebrate in Musquesh, where folks gathered to pay their respects while following all the social distancing and mask-wearing protocols of the Chief Public Health Officer. After the service, I had an opportunity to attend dinner at the Musquesh and Wellington Legions, at different times, of course. And, you know, it was important to see the turnout to recognize the memory of our fallen comrades. Physical crowds may have been a bit smaller this year, but that certainly didn't reduce the amount of Islanders who were showing their respects. Many held moments of silence in their own homes while taking in some services virtually. Others stopped into their local legion just to pay respect. Whichever way they choose to do so, I was proud to see so many Islanders Islanders participate in Remembrance Day and pay tribute to those who fought for the freedoms that we enjoy today. Let us never forget the sacrifices all those brave men and women made for the betterment of future generations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Minister of Environment, Water, and Climate Change, Minister responsible for status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a great honor and privilege to be rising today. I feel like I actually say that a lot, that great honor and privilege, because it really and truly is to be among MLAs who are working so hard for Islanders. I just can't say it enough. I also want to pass along my condolences to the member across, member Mermaid Stratford. I also am very close with my father, and I just cannot imagine losing him. So my thoughts and prayers are certainly with you and your family during an especially challenging time. I want to say a hello and a big thank you to all of the folks in District 9. You've been extremely patient this summer. I certainly appreciate that. There has been a number of infrastructure improvements in the district, and it's going to be great, but it's required some patience. But I know the Department of Transportation has been working hard, and it is greatly appreciated. Finally, I want to say hello to my kids who may or may not be watching today. They could be napping. Their educators, their early childhood educators, are on a much-deserved professional development day. So my kids are home. They're either with my husband or my parents, and I did want to extend a hello to them and also to my husband and parents for constantly stepping up to support them and to support me. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to a productive session ahead.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a great privilege again to rise and say hello to everybody in District 14. And recently, again, we've had some traffic issues in our district, and I want to say, I appreciate everybody coming forward and talking about those and in such a way, and then we can talk about those issues. But thank you for dealing with the patients. The work that's being done is incredibly important. I want to say again a special hello to everybody at Beach Grove and Garden Home, especially the veterans. Sometimes veterans often towards the end of their lives end up in long-term care facilities. And I think with COVID right now, it makes it a little bit harder to go and hear those stories. And I just want to say thank you, and thank you for your service. And especially, too, with Head Office of Veterans Affairs Canada right here in Charlottetown. I think Charlottetown is a special place for where we kind of develop a philosophy and views that goes across the country with the great people here in Prince Edward Island. And lastly, I want to just say congratulations to the Canadian Mental Health Association for putting on an incredible fundraiser just recently where they raised a lot of money, and it's very important, and it's a hard time to raise money with COVID, and they did an incredible job. And a special thank you to Tim Chason, Catherine McClellan, Irish Mython, and MC Gerard Murphy. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it is a pleasure to rise today. I would like to echo what the Premier said about the beautiful Walk of Heroes that's down at the A. Macdonald Memorial Park in Georgetown. I had the opportunity to represent my caucus and lay a wreath during that service in Georgetown, and it was absolutely beautiful. We were seated in the gardens, and I just can't think of a more beautiful place to have spent such a picturesque day and such an important day to celebrate our veterans. And I just wanted to say congratulations to the staff of King's Playhouse, because they really pulled together such a beautiful event, and that service was just phenomenal. So I just wanted to congratulate them on that. I'd also like to thank my colleagues for their many condolences and wishes to me over a difficult time for my family. Mermaid Stratford is a district that I grew up in. My father and mother raised me from the day I was born. I went home to the same property that I live on right now, and I lived right next door to my mom and dad all of my life. And it's just a real honor to represent a district that you were raised in. And it's a district that you understand just how important community is. And when you're raised in a family that emulates that every day, it's just something to be so grateful for. So, yes, My district lost an incredible man 2 weeks ago, Glenn Beaton. He worked on big ideas. He was hired in the government in the 70s when they decided to make PEI a tourism destination. And that is what he worked on for the first 15 years of his time in government. And he did that. He did that hands down. And there's so many. You can look at the public parks, the provincial parks. You can look at the Delta Hotel. You can look at the Atlantic Vet College. You can see his legacy in so many areas of this province. He took on wicked problems. When he was Director of Highway Safety, he recognized how many youth we were losing to drinking and driving. He implemented the Contract for Life. He implemented Students Against Drinking and Driving. And over the years, as Director of Highway Safety, he left so many things that are used across the country when you look at graduated licenses and other things. But his desire to save our youth and to keep them safe on the roads, that was probably his greatest legacy that he left within that department. My dad's solutions were never about enforcement. They were always about understanding the issue. They were about educating people on those issues. And they were about building communities, because that's how he saw resolving problems. Glenn always saw the possibilities. He never saw the impossibilities. And I want to thank everybody for their kind words to myself, to my mom, Mary, my sister, my brothers, and especially my daughter, Ava. We had the joy of being loved every day of our lives. And for that, I'm truly blessed and honored. And I would encourage everyone to emulate Glenn Beaton, because he's just a beautiful man who was kind and was about community, and he never saw the impossible. He always went after the possible. Thank you.
Honorable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And wow, it's quite the feeling here as I welcome my colleagues back here to the House today. Hopefully we get lots of work done. I want to recognize everyone watching from District 18 Rustico Emerald. And first off, I just have to mention the Remembrance Day, display in the town of North Rustico. Hundreds of crosses that the Knights of Columbus made and displayed. It was truly moving. Each one of them had the name of an individual, Mr. Speaker, that had served from the local area. And there were many people who came out and, of course, did so safely with physical distancing. But if it's something I would highly recommend everyone in the House take the time and just drop by North Rustico and see that display. I think it's something, like many things in COVID, is probably going to stay around afterwards. Also, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to recognize our educators and, the fantastic job they have done throughout the pandemic, especially reopening the schools. I mean, right now our early childhood educators are having the last couple of days of the Early Childhood Development Association conference. That's finishing up these next couple of days. And we were so proud to support that sector by designating 5 centers as early years centers. It's a huge, big deal. Unfortunately, the media didn't pick up on it, but these 5 centers have been working for a couple of years at least and really doing amazing things to earn that designation. And there are others that still want to do it, and we're going to support them and make sure that at some point in the future they get that as well. And Mr. Speaker, I also wanted to recognize our teachers at the K-12 level. The PITF, the Teachers Federation, is having their big convention today. And it's a good time for them not only to recharge and reconnect with their colleagues, but they're focused on a lot of really critical professional development. And I know they're putting their heart and soul to be ready just in case, God forbid, we need to go to a case where there's remote learning. That's one of their focuses. Mr. Speaker, if anyone's met my Deputy Minister, Bethany McLeod, she's got a great sense of humor, and I think so many teachers do, and I think that's what has allowed them to excel, along with their innovative ways and their resiliency, Mr. Speaker. So thank you to all our teachers.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's certainly a pleasure for me to rise in the House on this first day back of the fall session. And I want to do a quick shout out to all the residents in my district over in Stratford. Mr. Speaker, I'd really like to emphasize how proud I am of the staff that are working in the front line of healthcare service here on PEI and what they've been able to do over the last 8 months as we've experienced unprecedented times in this COVID. It hasn't been easy on them, but you know, as Dr. Trevor Jane continues to call them, they're true COVID warriors. And you know, the work they're doing, the services that they're able to provide and to ensure that health services are there and available for Islanders where and when is required. So hats off to all those incredible COVID warriors that are working in the healthcare system. Mr. Speaker, one of the members across just spoke about a little bit of a transportation roadwork project happening in his district and a little bit of increase in traffic. You know, we have some very important work happening right now in the Hillsborough Bridge, and that is the active transportation lane that has been sped up to make it happen much sooner than originally planned. And I'd like to congratulate the Minister of Transportation for the great work that he and his team are doing on this project and the continuing work that's going on. There are some hiccups in previous projects on the bridge with regards to traffic, but as I mentioned to the Minister here just recently, the traffic flow with what they have set up for this stage of the construction has been stellar. The traffic flow has been terrific. So I just want to thank the Minister and his department for that work, and I'm very much looking forward to the project being completed and finally to have that active transportation lane in place so that walkers and bicyclists can safely get across the bridge. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to extend my condolences to the member for Mermaid Stratford. A lot has been said here about Glenn Beaton this afternoon and over the last couple of weeks, but you know, I've known Glenn for quite some time from my district and involvement in the community. A few things that haven't been mentioned about Glenn. He was a very funny man, but dedicated to his community, dedicated to the people in his community, and dedicated to his family. I've had the privilege now to work with the Honourable Member for a couple of years. Previously, I had the pleasure to work with her sister and brother in the hospitality industry, both wonderful individuals, and again, I extend my condolences to them, to the member, and to your mom, Mary. You know, in addition to the work that Glenn did in his community with his involvement with Rotary as well, what a lot of people don't know about Glenn was not only he was a long-term civil servant, he was also an entrepreneur. You know, we talk about Vista Bay Golf Course. He started a business to grow hops. Had a little bit of a incident one night where some young people broke into his drawing shed because they thought it was actually a different crop. We won't get into what that was. But you know, I look back at my time in the Rotary Club at Stratford, working alongside Glenn on many projects, and everything that was said here today is true. So again, Honourable Member, my condolences. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to welcome everyone back, and I want to thank everybody who's reached out to me the past week or so with well wishes. I'd like to say that I came with my usual energy today, but I certainly didn't. I know that Cheryl is home watching Arthur and Mila, and I certainly didn't much feel like leaving them when I came in here this morning, but she's sending me pictures. They have the TV turned on. They're watching proceedings today. Well, they're sleepy right now. I assume like their father, they're waiting for question period to start. I imagine that's what they're getting their rest before question period, if they're anything like their father. So I want to thank all of the staff at the QEH who helped us through the time that we spent in there. Truly fantastic, quick-moving individuals. When we landed there in the middle of the night, people came in from all corners to kind of help make it all happen before morning. So they were great, and I was able to connect with an old friend of mine. I don't know if she'd mind me saying old, but we'll say old friend. Leah. Leah was a friend of mine back in the old days when we used to hang out at her cousin Theo McClellan's apartment. Anybody who knows Theo knows what we were probably doing at his apartment back in them days. But Leo's a nurse in that area, and I got to see quite a bit of her over a few days. So I want to thank everyone who helped us while we were there. And last and certainly not leastly, I want to welcome a friend of mine, Zach Bell, who's upstairs watching on TV and who will soon be taking a seat in this very legislature. I'm very happy for him, a fantastic individual, and I think Islanders will come see over the next number of years what a great character Zach has and what a great addition he'll be to this assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, did I miss anyone? Don't think. Member statement. The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What an honor and privilege it is to be elected as a member of the Legislative Assembly of Prince Edward Island, to serve our communities in such a unique and extraordinary way. Over the past 18 months of being an MLA, it has become more apparent to me that at times this privilege has been abused. It seems a culture has been created that leads some to believe MLAs are elected to serve a select and favored few. This comes in the form of passing along jobs, programs, and special services to some, but not to all. This activity creates a power imbalance that leaves people feeling as though they have a duty to their MLA and owe them their loyalty for the favor received. Some MLAs have benefited from this perceived debt, as it often causes individuals to be duty-bound to vote for the MLA in the next election. As MLAs, we are elected to serve all. We cannot pass out jobs for votes. We cannot hook someone up to a service because of who they are or who they know. We must not in any circumstance show favoritism. Nepotism and partisanship may have been two tools used in the past, but we cannot afford to continue that unethical practice. Our job is to help all people navigate the systems, to find the employment programs, the mental physical health programs, the social programs, the paving programs, the wage support programs, or whatever it is they need, regardless of their political affiliations. As elected officials, we serve all our constituents equally based on their need. We must not show favorites. Instead, we provide all Islanders with equity and fairness, regardless of where they live, regardless of who they have voted for, regardless of who they may vote for in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition? No? Oh, the Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is an honor to rise today to recognize Stephanie Freer. Stephanie is an active, community-oriented resident of District 5. If you know Stephanie personally, you know her to be passionate about her family, an avid cyclist, and a doer. She's that person who won't rest until that job is done. We often know people well in one aspect of their lives, the great neighbor, the wonderful parent, or the dedicated friend. But we don't always get to see the other impacts or contributions they make in other parts of their lives. Stephanie works as a radiation therapist at the PEI Cancer Treatment Center, and her contribution literally changes lives every single day. Recently, the Prince Edward Island Association of Medical Radiation Sciences awarded Stephanie the Queen Elizabeth Hospital Award for Quality and Safety. This is awarded annually to a staff member or team in recognition of their valued leadership in promoting quality and safety within their workplaces. Stephanie was nominated for the role she played in standardizing skin care for radiation therapy cancer patients within the Maritime Provinces, for standardizing patient education for head and neck radiation therapy patients within the Maritime Provinces, integrating speech-language pathologist care in the head and neck radiation therapy program, and implementing the use of vaginal dilators for female radiation therapy pelvis patients post-treatment. Our healthcare sector our community, and our whole island are better off because of the dedication, passion, and hard work Stephanie carries with her in everything she does. Please join me in sending a huge congratulations to Stephanie in recognition of her commitment to island patients and the MRT profession. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Montague Kilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to rise today and acknowledge a constituent of mine, Michaela Laporte. Michaela has completed her apprenticeship as a Red Seal truck and transport mechanic, making her the first female on Prince Edward Island to do so. Through hard work and dedication, Michaela has been able to break through into a male-dominated field on Prince Edward Island. She has logged over 10,000 hours in the trade and has completed her last block of training in the Truck and Transport Training Program in Dartmouth. Mr. Speaker, I hope Michaela can serve as a role model and an example to female high school students all across Prince Edward Island who may be hesitant about enrolling in male-dominated trades programs. This is also a great example of the PEI Skills Development Program and Apprenticeship PEI helping young adults acquire the skills and certification necessary. Michaela is currently employed at Palmer Automotive and Truck Repair in Pools Corner. She takes immense pride in her work and is thrilled to be able to be employed in her community. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to recognize Joe Rooney at Atlantic Equipment Repair, who mentored Michaela throughout her apprenticeship and taught her the skills and knowledge required to be successful in the field. Mr. Rooney serves as a great example of the importance of mentors in the apprenticeship program. Mr. Speaker, I am thrilled to acknowledge Michaela's achievement today. It is a great story of not only women succeeding in the trades field on Prince Edward Island, but also of rural islanders being able to find gainful employment in their community and being able to avoid having to relocate out of province in search for work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, honourable members, questions by members. Start with the response to questions taken as noticed. No? For first question, I'll ask the honourable leader of the official opposition.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. We're now 8 months into the COVID pandemic, and compared to many other places, PEI, of course, has done really well at keeping the virus at bay and islanders safe. Economically, however, things are less clear. A magic money faucet through federal programs like CERB and other relief programs has kept islanders and island businesses afloat during these uncertain times, but that magic faucet can't stay opened indefinitely, and that has a lot of islanders and a lot of island businesses worried. Individuals and most businesses, of course, have survived so far, but the reality is that many will not make it through another year like 2020. Question to the Premier. Is PEI on the track indicated in the COVID recovery motion that we debated this spring that suggested that our economy today would be humming along at a pace better than it was in November 2019?
The honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I believe, I thank the honourable member for the question. I believe that I will let the Minister of Finance give a better answer going forward here, but I believe we're in a little bit better place than maybe we originally thought when it first hit here, COVID, in March of 2020, and we had a big serious lockdown. I think that many sectors of our economy have probably outperformed what we thought they would have. Industries such as tourism, for example, aerospace are devastated, quite frankly. So I'm not sure it's a simple answer. It was a detailed question from the honourable member, and it probably requires a more detailed answer, but I think we're quite a bit behind where we were obviously this time last year, but I think we're maybe just a little bit perhaps ahead of where we would have anticipated back in March of this year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable leader of the official opposition.
That's an interesting answer, and I'd be interested to see those details that suggest that we are better off than we anticipated, because the motion that we debated, of course, suggested that by now our economy would actually be bigger and doing just fine. I don't see that when I look around the communities of Prince Edward Island. Many islanders are anxious, of course, about whether their job will still be there after we get through this winter, and so many island businesses are anxious about whether they will be around this time next year. Question to the Premier. How will your government ensure that all island jobs and all island businesses will still be there when the magic money faucet gets turned off?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure it's a magic money faucet. I think it's a provincial government and a federal government who are trying to respond to a global pandemic that has hit the island and hit the world, Mr. Speaker. So I don't know if I would, I have spoken at length of how grateful I am for the response from our Prime Minister with the help of our 4 MPs, of how amazingly they have come to the aid of Canadians and Islanders, Mr. Speaker, and I would shudder to think where we would be if both levels of government didn't do that, Mr. Speaker. What I was trying to indicate in my original answer to the question was there are areas such as bioscience, that we're doing better than we would have thought, Mr. Speaker. So I think you have to look at it in a big picture. Are Islanders worried, and should they be worried, Mr. Speaker? Absolutely. I can only tell you from my perspective, speaking on behalf of this government, we will be there with them every step of the way as we have been, and I'm very, very grateful and sure that following the lead of the Prime Minister of this country, Mr. Speaker, that he'll be there with them too.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Of course, myself and every member of this House is extraordinarily grateful for the help that had to be there in order to make Islanders and indeed all Canadians and businesses get through this incredibly difficult time. But a day of reckoning is coming. A day of reckoning is coming, and we have to get our economy and our balance sheet in order. These are really tough questions, and I agree with the Premier. There's no easy answers, and I make no apology for asking them. Every jurisdiction around this world is being challenged in exactly the same ways. There are some things, however, that can be done to help protect Prince Edward Island from the uncertainties of COVID as we rebuild our economy. A question to the Premier. What specific actions is your government taking to build an island economy that is future-proofed and will create greater certainty and comfort for Islanders during these turbulent times?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the Leader for the question. It is a good question, and it is a hard question, Mr. Speaker, and I'm not the least bit upset that he's asking them. I think they need to be asked, and we also need to collectively work together to provide some of the answers, Mr. Speaker. We have been doing that for 8 or 9 months, and we need to continue to do that. I think, Mr. Speaker, first and foremost, before we look at getting past this, we have to make sure we get through it, Mr. Speaker, and we're not through it by any means, Mr. Speaker. We have done very well here in Prince Edward Island because we followed the public health protocols. We've been ahead of the game, Mr. Speaker, and we've been consistent. And as we've said in here time and time again, Islanders have followed the protocols. They've taken it seriously, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we're in the position that we are. And I think that's a position that allows us to get ahead of this as we make the road to recovery, Mr. Speaker. We've also been working with the Premier's Council on Recovery, Mr. Speaker. Many, many good ideas of how we don't just try to go back to normal, but what we use this opportunity to define what PEI can be, Mr. Speaker, and go and be that and be the best we can be, Mr. Speaker. Everyone has a role to play, Mr. Speaker. Everyone in this legislature does. Everyone who lives in this province does, Mr. Speaker, and I need their help.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. We know that these uncertain times have been really hard on all Islanders, but for those struggling with mental health and addictions, these stresses and uncertainties of COVID have only increased the challenges that they face. Recently, the Quebec Premier stated that mental health statistics in his province show a significant increase in the numbers of people experiencing mental health issues, and I know there are other jurisdictions around the world that would underline that. To the Premier, what do we know here on Prince Edward Island about the incidence of mental health concerns among Islanders since the pandemic hit?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do believe that, COVID has exposed a lot of things here. It's taught us a lot about ourselves, and it's exposed a lot of the challenges that we have. I think it would be naive for anybody to stand in this legislature or anywhere in Prince Edward Island and suggest that the pressures, the fears, the impacts that COVID has had on this province hasn't increased the pressures within our families and communities when it comes to mental health, Mr. Speaker. I really do think that it is, we'll continue to see it rolling forward, Mr. Speaker. What we're trying to do as a province is to address the issues. Mental health has been probably one of the biggest issues, if not the biggest issues we've had to deal with in our short time in government, Mr. Speaker. We continue to work on it. Our resolve is to continue to get better at it, Mr. Speaker, and to try to be there to help all of those Islanders, Mr. Speaker, who are impacted in any way. That's, I think, what our job is here, Mr. Speaker, and we have to continue to do the best we can to provide those services to all Islanders who need them, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Well, I mean, well before the pandemic, our healthcare system was not able, even then, to meet the needs of individuals struggling with mental health and addictions issues. The PC government knows this too, of course, and in fact, the very first promise in the PC platform document from spring of 2019 is to, and I quote, replace the Hillsborough Hospital immediately. Question to the Premier, what is your definition of immediately?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know for sure it can't be soon enough, Mr. Speaker. Look, it's a need that we have. We have embarked on a very ambitious plan, Mr. Speaker, that was started, and give full credit to the previous government who got this thing rolling along. We're developing a mental health campus with services all across Prince Edward Island, which we believe will revolutionize the service we provide here in Prince Edward Island, Mr. Speaker. It will be the single biggest capital investment we will make as a province, Mr. Speaker, for many years, probably in our history, Mr. Speaker. But obviously it can't come soon enough, Mr. Speaker. I believe the situation has been let go too long, Mr. Speaker. I can only deal with the time that we are here right now, and from the time we get into government till now, Mr. Speaker, we've been pushing that file forward at breakneck speed, Mr. Speaker, and I can't wait for the day that we can say it's open and functioning and treating Islanders, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks again, Mr. Speaker. The second promise from the platform from spring 2019 went like this, I quote, ensure the new facility that has yet to be built is equipped to handle mental health emergencies. Another question to the Premier. In the absence of any sort of replacement facility for the Hillsborough Hospital, and with Unit 9 only recently reopening with less than half of those beds dedicated to psychiatric patients, never mind any particular facility being able to handle mental health emergencies, is our province itself adequately resourced and equipped to handle mental health emergencies?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I do think we have incredible professionals who work in that field every day and who are doing everything they can to provide the service to Islanders who need it. Obviously, through COVID, Mr. Speaker, there was a tremendous disruption. We implemented some emergency plans, Mr. Speaker, in the event of the unknown of COVID that we're starting to roll back now, Mr. Speaker. But as the Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness knows all too well, Mr. Speaker, resources in terms of human resources in that field is a challenge, Mr. Speaker, for sure. We are committed to doing everything we can to be fast, Mr. Speaker, to address the shortfalls that are there, Mr. Speaker. But I'm the first one to say, Mr. Speaker, it's a difficult issue and one that affects all Islanders, Mr. Speaker, and I think collectively as a province, without a doubt, we need to do better.
The Honourable Member from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Mr. Speaker, I agree with our Premier that the situation with the new mental health campus build has gone on for far too long. And I'm concerned that this dream of a new mental health campus is still many years out under this current government's leadership. So until then, our staff and patients are left with the current Hillsborough Hospital. Question to the Minister of Health. Are you aware of the significant safety concerns that still exist with the Hillsborough Hospital?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, first I want to address the timeline for the replacement of Hillsborough Hospital. Mr. Speaker, within the next couple of weeks, we'll actually be turning sod to start construction on the first two components of that, and that would be Lacey House and structured housing. Mr. Speaker, there's been lots of talk about a lack of adequate psychiatric beds during the COVID. Mr. Speaker, that's couldn't be further from the truth. Mr. Speaker, we have a hard-working, dedicated team that has stepped up and done amazing work at Prince County Hospital. We have incredible staff at the Hillsborough Hospital that have been going above and beyond to ensure that anybody that needs to be admitted has a bed in a psychiatric safe unit. Mr. Speaker, we've had a mental health team that has gone above and beyond introducing new initiatives to support Islanders with mental health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is good to hear that the builds are starting on some of the buildings, but the new mental health campus, the plan is not even yet approved for that. I'd like to commend the staff as well, though, at the Hillsborough Hospital for the work they have done to create a safe and welcoming space with the limitations of the building. The building itself was designed over 100 years ago as an asylum. Just let that sink in for a minute. It poses several safety concerns that can simply not be addressed without a new building. Question to the Minister of Health. How many dedicated full-time staff are on the master planning team? And have you provided the master planning team for the new mental health campus enough supports to plan an extremely complex and critical project as quickly as possible?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, again, I want to reiterate that the staff in Health PEI, particularly in the mental health and addictions field, has gone above and beyond. You know, that they've refocused during this difficult time, the last 8 months during the pandemic. But Mr. Speaker, they've brought in new programs. I'll just list a couple. They've introduced a new mental health line. They've introduced a children's COVID-19 workbook. They've introduced a new phone-based child and youth mental health clinic, psychiatric unit care clinics, both in Charlottetown and Summerside. Mr. Speaker, we've gone through a difficult time. We're still experiencing a difficult time with the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, we have great leadership within the master planning team. They've been working closely with the City of Charlottetown, the architects, the engineers, all the people that are required to move this project forward, and I have complete faith in them. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Mr. Speaker, I believe that we do have great people working on the master planning team. There's simply just not enough of them to move this forward as quickly as it needs to move forward. I will ask again, Minister, how many dedicated full-time staff are working on the master planning team? Have you provided this team with the necessary resources to move this forward as quickly as possible so that we can get started on the build for the new mental health campus?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, so again, the team is led by a gentleman who has great experience and great skills. He was in Ontario for a number of years working on some of the largest projects in all of Canada around Sunnybrook. Mr. Speaker, he came back to PEI. It was great to repatriate this kind of expertise back to PEI to lead this project. Mr. Speaker, again, I reiterate, within the next couple of weeks, we're actually going to be turning sod on the first 2 builds off this mental health campus. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, not the new mental health hospital. That plan is still not finalized. As soon as Unit 9 opened up 6 of the 22 beds available, the psychiatric urgent care clinics known as PUCs were forced to close because of staff shortages. This tells me that the staffing levels are dangerously low in mental health and addictions. And if we can't even keep the limited number of services that we provide open now, I'm not sure how a shiny new mental health campus will even be helpful if we can't have the trained staff that we need to operate it. Question to the Minister of Health. Are you offering any incentives or creative initiatives to increase the number of mental health staff, nurses, doctors, and specialists here on Prince Edward Island?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Well, first and foremost, Mr. Speaker, I need to correct a statement that was made there. There's 2 PUCs, one in Summerside, one in Charlottetown. They weren't closed. Mr. Speaker, the one in Summerside was embedded in the emergency department of the Prince County Hospital. It's still operating where it was originally started. Mr. Speaker, yes, we did have staffing redeployment issues, but Mr. Speaker, when we had to temporarily close the PUC at the Hillsborough Hospital, all of the services that were provided at the PUC at the Hillsborough Hospital were brought over to the emergency department at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. So every service that was available at the PUC at the Hillsborough Hospital is still currently available at the ED at the QEH. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
So just to clarify, the PUC in Charlottetown at the Hillsborough Hospital did close. I'm not sure why the Minister is suggesting it did not. And moving services to Unit 9 to the best of the ability on short notice means that people were not receiving the level of care that they had received at the PUC. It is a concern, and you need to be, the Minister must be accurate in what he's saying. The safety concerns at the Hillsborough Hospital highlight the need to have Unit 9 at full capacity. But the unfortunate knee-jerk reaction of the Minister a couple of weeks ago to open 6 beds in Unit 9 by removing elderly patients with dementia was nothing short of disturbing. Families of those patients have spoken out and are concerned. They claim that their loved ones have been moved to inappropriate spaces and are not receiving the care they need. Question to the Minister of Health. Were the ALC patients who were in Unit 9 until recently moved to beds that are unsuitable for appropriate and safe dementia treatment and care?
Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, again, I have to correct a statement that was just made. The PUCs were not closed. As I stated previously, the psychiatric urgent care clinic at Prince County Hospital was and is still embedded in the emergency department there. The psychiatric urgent care clinic that was located at the Hillsborough Hospital wasn't closed. It was moved to the emergency department at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. The services that were available at the Hillsborough Hospital are still available through the emergency department at the QEH. So, Mr. Speaker, with regards to reopening Unit 9, there were patients, alternative level care patients with dementia that have been moved to the Prince Edward Home or suitable acute care beds where they are continued to be monitored. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Mr. Speaker, we heard at committee weeks ago that as soon as news of Unit 9 remaining closed was made public, private long-term care homes brought forward proposals to modify beds in their facilities to provide suitable spaces for the dementia patients currently in Unit 9. What is unclear is why this possibility wasn't explored sooner. Solutions are available, but it requires effective prioritization, evidence-based decision-making, and leadership. Question to the Minister. When will we see the actions of your promises? When will Unit 9 be open at full capacity and the current patients in that unit in appropriate long-term care spaces?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Mr. Speaker, so again, I'm going to correct some information here. Late September, I called the Executive Director of the Private Long-Term Care Home Association and requested an inventory of vacant beds. September the 30th, I received the following update from the Executive Director. Good afternoon, Minister. I've contacted each of the private nursing homes, and these are the vacant beds. And he went through the list. All others report no vacancy. And then he talked about Chez Nous, who have 12 beds not able to open yet because they can't get appropriate staffing. I thanked the individual, and I said, and are any of these beds dementia beds? Response, Minister, there are no dementia beds available. On the 21st of October, Mr. Nutbrown presented at the Standing Committee, said that he had sent a letter offering 16 to 20 dementia beds. I then reached back into the association and I said, if you have them, where are they and how can we utilize them? I then received a short letter with a brief description of a vague possibility. Mr. Speaker, we're currently working with the Private Long-Term Care Association, but their proposal basically states that any of these beds could not be available until possibly into December or even January. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Third party.
Or third party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks for the promotion. With your indulgence, I'd just like to correct an error I made earlier when I passed on my condolences to the member from, the honourable member from Mermaid Stratford. I said the member from Stratford Kinloch, so I'd just like to say my sympathies. I know I've been around here for a while, so I guess that was the old district. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the Minister of Health. Minister, most of us know about the threat of so-called twindemic, where we get hit with the flu and the coronavirus. During the spring, the Minister said he would make flu vaccines mandatory for healthcare workers. Have you done this?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that would be a directive coming out of the CPHO office, and I can certainly reach back into the department, get that information, and bring it back. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the third party, your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I assume that you keep track of this, so you should be able to bring that information back and get us a percentage, if you could, Mr. Minister.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and honourable member, I'll do my absolute best to have that information for you tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So is the minister currently taking steps to ensure that healthcare workers and patients are safe by mandatory flu vaccines in the system?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member probably knows, we did bring in a larger inventory of flu vaccine this year. There's 3 types. There's the normal injectable vaccine that I hope everyone in this room has received, taken, I don't know, maybe I should ask for a show of hands. We'll do that later. Mr. Speaker, there's also a mist that's available, particularly for young children. And the third one is the high-dose influenza vaccine that was previously available for just those residents in long-term care, but we extended that to seniors as well. So, Mr. Speaker, we're certainly doing everything that we can, encouraging all islanders, not only healthcare workers, to get vaccinated for the flu. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from O'Leary Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's good to be on my feet again. It's been a while. Question to my favourite minister, the Minister of Health. As a result of the staff shortage in long-term government and long-term care, government filled the QEH Unit 9 with elderly patients suffering from dementia. So it basically says failures in the long-term care services have been compounded by your department's inability to provide appropriate access to mental health services. Quite like a card dealer in the Red Shores, Mr. Speaker, shuffling the deck of healthcare needs like cards in a stacked deck. My question is to the Minister. What role in the decision to shut down the QEH Unit 9 for mental health services to Islanders did you play?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Speaker, the decision to reallocate Unit 9 was done during a difficult time early in the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, we have, as a former Minister of Health would know, we have a dedicated team at Health PEI that are responsible for addressing situations such as this, pandemic planning. Mr. Speaker, there was many moving parts during this, but what we had to do, what it was essential to do, was prepare for the worst outcome. And that was going to be a major outbreak of COVID-19 here on PEI early on. So our professional staff made the calls, made the decisions in consultation with mental health and addictions leadership, with consultation with the joint response team. Mr. Speaker, this was put in place to protect Islanders, and I'm extremely proud of the work that these people have done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from O'Leary Inverness.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, thanks. Minister, you've been as invisible on this particular file as Casper the Ghost. But before the 2019 election, the Minister promised immediate fixes to mental health, and during the campaign, the Premier promised the job to basically have shovels in the ground to replace the Hillsborough Hospital would begin, and I quote, on April 24th, one day after the election was over. My question to the Minister, today, how many beds are now available to mental health care at Unit 9 at the QEH today?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Mr. Speaker, currently today there are 6 mental health acute care, psychiatric acute care beds available in Unit 9. But Mr. Speaker, what we also have to understand is there was also a brand new 4-bed adolescent unit opened at the Hillsborough Hospital. Mr. Speaker, we also have to understand that the services were beefed up at the Prince County Hospital. Mr. Speaker, we also have to understand that we have acute care psychiatric beds available at the Hillsborough Hospital. I've said it earlier during question period, I'll state it again. If there's any Islander that was deemed by a qualified clinician, and that's not the Minister, a qualified clinician, a psychiatrist, that this individual needs to be admitted, they were admitted. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from O'Leary Inverness.
Minister, obviously the Minister can't be quite so much in touch with constituents out there, because I'm getting calls from constituents saying that mental health is a complete shambles. They can't get access to the services that they're required. You basically have shut down mental health services using COVID-19 as the excuse. But I might say, as of today, you haven't had one person even go to a hospital yet for COVID, Mr. Speaker. It's been bad planning and a cold-hearted decision to shut those whole services down. Left many Islanders in a very bad situation, Mr. Speaker, while they're struggling with mental health. Today, what is your backup plan to deal with this issue? Because Islanders are looking for help, Mr. Speaker, and they're looking for this Minister for guidance.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, again, the honourable member talks about a shortage of beds. I just went through what's available and how mental health has been dealt with here on PEI during this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, I'll give you a couple more stats. We talked previously over many, many years about how long the wait time was for a psychiatric assessment. Well, Mr. Speaker, in this past 8 months, we've been able to greatly reduce wait times for psychiatric assessment. Right now for an adult, it's as low as 14 days or shorter. Right now for a child and youth, it's 28 days maximum. In many cases, that's much shorter than that. So, Mr. Speaker, this member can talk about how terrible things are, but I'm extremely proud of the tremendous work that our healthcare workers are doing here to support Islanders. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member from Cornwall, Meadowbanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I guess I'll continue the trend, Mr. Speaker, and ask the Minister of Health a couple of questions. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, we've seen this government make promises that are broken, but I don't want to talk about bricks and mortar, Mr. Speaker, because I'm getting the same calls as the honourable member is getting, and everybody in here is likely getting, including the Premier, I'm sure. They're getting calls because there's a lot of anxiety and stress. The World Health Organization has said it's the next pandemic. We have committee that we bring in, the Canadian Mental Health Association, they're telling us that it's in shambles. We have Dr. Kaiser come in and say it's not that bad. We have a minister telling us how hard everybody's working, and that's great, but the wheels are spinning, but we're not getting anywhere. When did this government decide that mental health and addictions is not an illness?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Mr. Speaker, I believe my track record speaks for itself. Being in opposition for over 7 years, I was probably one of the loudest advocates for mental health and addictions here on PEI. Mr. Speaker, I was proud, extremely proud and privileged when the Premier asked me if I would take this file on, because I want to move the markers forward. I want to ensure that mental health and addictions here on PEI is the best in Canada. Mr. Speaker, again, we have tremendous people working in the system, supporting Islanders. Can we do more? We certainly can. Are we going to do more? Absolutely. Mr. Speaker, this government has never not considered mental health and addictions not to be an illness. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Cornwall, Meadowbanks, your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I remember, Mr. Speaker, a CBC story done on March 26th of the young man's name was Doyle, was his last name. His first name is Taylor or Tyler Doyle. And he said at the time that there was many patients being discharged, as we've heard in the House today. And he said, I was 2 weeks into my program, and he said, it felt like I was being thrown to the wolves. I'm back on the street. So, Mr. Speaker, to me, someone made a grave mistake. It took a lot of advocacy by many organizations to get those beds at the QEH. And I don't care which government it was, Mr. Speaker, what we need this government to do is to stand up and recognize that mental health is a major issue and can complete chaos. We're hearing it from staff, we're hearing it from advocates, we're hearing it from the Canadian Mental Health Association. What is the plan for this government in the next 3 months? Not 3 years when we talk about bricks and mortar, 3 months.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and the honourable member is quite correct that there is a serious issue with regards to mental health and addictions. But, Mr. Speaker, it's simply not just here on PEI. When I'm on a FPT call with health ministers and the federal minister almost on a weekly basis, everyone's talking about it in their jurisdictions. There's a serious issue right now with health human resources. We held a summit last Friday with a large group of people in an extremely large room because we wanted to first and foremost ensure that we were physically social distancing. But, Mr. Speaker, there was great dialogue, there was great discussion came out of that on how we can recruit and how we can retain and how we can train more healthcare workers. Mr. Speaker, Doug Curry, VP of Holland College, a former health minister, was on CBC the other night talking about the work that we're doing together. Mr. Speaker, we have recruited 2 new psychiatrists who are coming in early 2021, and one of them is going to be dedicated to working at Unit 9 at the QEH. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Cornwall Meadowbanks, your second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know, Mr. Speaker, back in February of 2019, there was a fund, I think, Emergency Treatment Fund bilateral agreement for opioid crisis. Can the minister tell me how much or what has been spent out of that fund to date?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't have that information at my fingertips today, but I'd be more than happy to bring it back. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Montague-Kilmuir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dialysis is a complex medical issue that can be mentally and physically exhausting for those requiring the treatment. And currently in Kings County, there's especially southern Kings County, a number of patients that have to travel to either Surrey or the QEH to access this service. With even though we have a hospital right there in Montague. Minister, is there any possibility that we could have this service offered at the Kings County Memorial Hospital in Montague?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, currently we have capacity for 130 dialysis patients. Right now we have 102 Islanders accessing 102 of those 130 chairs. Mr. Speaker, we're doing a full review right now of services provided at Kings County Memorial. We've put quite a bit of investment into Kings County over the last number of years with regards to the emergency department and ambulatory service. Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to look at that. I unfortunately can't make a commitment today to having dialysis in Montague at KCMH, but again, we do have it available both in Charlottetown and in Surrey. Thank you.
The honourable member from Montague-Kilmuir, your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The long travel back and forth can be very hard on patients and their families, usually because they need someone to drive them for this, and it can be a whole day, and it really takes the energy right out of them. And I know of some individuals that actually rent a room in Charlottetown because they can't travel that long of a distance. Minister, I guess, what resources and what staff would be required at KCMH so that we can offer this service?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, certainly there'd have to be an investment in the equipment as well as the specialized staff that would be required to provide dialysis at the KCMH. But, Mr. Speaker, space would also be a concern. But right now, as I said, there is 130 dialysis chairs available, and 102 Islanders are getting service through that, both in Surrey, Charlottetown, and various other locations across BI. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Montague-Kilmuir, your second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know the minister had mentioned a kind of a long-term renewal plan for KCMH, and I really hope dialysis can be included in that. We would like to see it dialysis offered sooner rather than later. I know it's something that I've had constituents call me about quite often, and it's very emotional for them, and they'd really like to see this service. Minister, are you able to commit that we can that there will be a time in the future, perhaps 6, 8, 10 months, that we can offer dialysis at the KCMH in Montague?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to the honourable member, thank you again for the line of questioning. I think we talked about this in the spring session as well. Mr. Speaker, what I can commit to is that we will continue to provide dialysis across PEI to any Islander that requires it. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this month, Islanders learned they'll have to wait even longer to get the details about the IRAC investigation on the Irving land deal. The whole process has been secretive, with very few details given on how the investigation had progressed. When the minister finally received the report, he did treat it like a hot potato. First, it was his report to release, then it was IRAC's, then the Information and Privacy Commissioner needed to sign off. A question to the Minister of Agriculture and Land. Why did you authorize IRAC to release the report as written, but would not release the report as written yourself?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land.
Mr. Speaker, and of course, this file has been an ongoing case, Mr. Speaker. Of course, 14 months ago, I asked for this investigation, which I had no control of when it would be completed. Finally, it was completed, Mr. Speaker, and when we did receive it, Mr. Speaker, of course, we have to comply by the Freedom of Information and Privacy Act, Mr. Speaker, which, as a Minister of the Crown, of course, you abide by all the laws of this island, Mr. Speaker. And so as soon as the Privacy Commissioner sees this report, and we will release it, and a fully intention of releasing this report, Mr. Speaker, so all islanders can see. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But what's curious about the referral to the Information Commissioner is that the Minister, as the Minister of Justice and Public Safety, oversees the Access and Privacy Services Office. This office assists public bodies across government in protecting privacy during the release of information. A question to the Minister: why did you not use this office in your own department to provide advice on the report?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, I am the Minister of Justice and Public Safety, and that office is in my, but believe me, Mr. Speaker, there's been a lot of lawyers advising the proper laws and the roles that we take. And I listened to my legal counsel, and they said we have to go through the Privacy Commissioner, Mr. Speaker, for the Freedom of Information and Privacy Act, which, Mr. Speaker, is an important act across this island, that it's for the people, Mr. Speaker, and I have to abide by the law. The Privacy Commissioner, Mr. Speaker, she will release it as soon as she can, and what she can release, we'll be all happy to see it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From my perspective, referring the matter to the Information and Privacy Commissioner will only delay the release. It will delay it past this sitting of this Legislative Assembly. I can't think of any other instance in which government has asked the Commissioner, an independent office of the Legislative Assembly, to sign off on a government report. Question to the Minister: can you name any other instances that this has happened?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land.
Mr. Speaker, this is an interesting line of questioning, Mr. Speaker, but of course the report found that the parties involved were offside, Mr. Speaker. I took action, Mr. Speaker, and asked them to divest their land, Mr. Speaker, to come into compliance, Mr. Speaker. And that's what I have done, Mr. Speaker, and I will continue to abide by the law, Mr. Speaker, and enforce it. Thank you.
Good Minister right there. That's
The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford, your final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister put out a news release on October 27th that stated, and I quote, "There are reasonable and probable grounds that two individuals and the corporation involved contravene the Lands Protection Act by having aggregate land holdings in excess of the prescribed limits during the time period reviewed by IRAC." A question to the Minister: when will the Minister refer the report to and its findings to the Crown Prosecutor's Office?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land.
Mr. Speaker, of course, we have to wait for the Privacy Commissioner, and then the report will be released, Mr. Speaker. But we have taken action, Mr. Speaker. The parties involved, Mr. Speaker, have been asked to divest the land, to come into compliance with the Lands Protection Act, Mr. Speaker. And we are proud of that, and Mr. Speaker, and we will continue to enforce that. Thank you.
Okay, the end of question period. Statements by ministers? No. Presenting and receiving petitions? Tabling of documents? The honourable member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By leave of the House, I beg leave to table the notice from Health PEI dated November 6th, notifying the public that the Charlottetown Psychiatric Urgent Care Centre had temporarily closed. And I move, seconded by Summerside Wilmot, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry?
Oh, I have another one.
The honourable member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By leave of the House, I beg leave to table a news article from CBC that highlights the concerns of the nursing union blaming poor planning on the closure of the psychiatric urgent care clinic. And I moved, seconded by Summerside Wilmot, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry? Carry. Any more tabling of documents? No? Oh, the Honorable Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, please be advised that pursuant to Rule 80K of the Rules of the Legislative Assembly of Prince Edward Island, the following documents were received by the Office of the Clerk and tabled intercessionally. These documents were circulated to members as they were received, and this list will be made in the public record and put into the Journal for November 12th.
Shall it carry? Did I miss anyone? No? Reports by committees? Introduction of government bills? The Honorable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill to be intituled An Act to Amend the Student Financial Assistance Act, and I move, seconded by the Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy, that the same be now received and read a first time.
Shall it carry? Carry. Overview?
Here's a copy. Yes, a brief explanation. So, Mr. Speaker, this amendment is required to update the Board of Directors for the Student Financial Assistance Corporation. It changes the name of the department responsible for the Act from the former Department of Workforce and Advanced Learning to Education and Lifelong Learning, and it changes the composition of the Board of Directors to include the Deputy Minister of Social Development and Housing to replace the Deputy Minister of Workforce and Advanced Learning.
Thank you.
Bill number 65, an act to amend the Student Financial Assistance Act, read a first time.
Shall it carry? The Honorable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to leave to introduce a bill to be intituled An Act to Amend the Hospitals Act, and I move, seconded by the Honourable Premier, that the same be now received and read a first time.
Shall it carry? Overview, Minister.
Certainly, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a very short bill that repeals obsolete legislative provisions and a reference to the former Stewart Memorial Hospital. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Bill number 48, an act to amend the Hospitals Act, read a first time.
Shall it carry? The Honorable Finance Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill to be entitled An Act to Amend the Financial Administration Act, and I move, seconded by the Honourable Minister of Health, that the same be now received and read a first time.
Shall it carry? Overview, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill would amend for the 2019-2020 fiscal year only the date by which public accounts must be submitted to the Legislative Assembly. This one-time extension to January 31st, 2021 was required to give reporting entities additional time to complete their work, some of which has been delayed by the result of COVID, but also, Mr. Speaker, by the malware situation we experienced earlier. Thank you.
Bill number 69, an act to amend the Financial Administration Act, read a first time.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Communities.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill to be entitled An Act to Amend the Municipal Governments Act, and I move, seconded by the Minister of Economic Growth and Tourism, that the same be now received and read as the first time.
Shall it carry? Overview, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill amends the Municipal Government Act in response to feedback from municipalities. The majority of the proposed changes are administrative, such as minor grammatic fixes to legal clarity and consistency. Other proposed changes stem from the administration of municipal elections, specific requests to provide PACE program, COVID-19 response, and minor policy changes.
Bill number 66, an act to amend the Municipal Government Act, read a first time.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land, Minister of Justice, Public Safety, and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to leave to introduce a bill to be entitled An Act to Repeal the Films Act, and I move, seconded by the Minister of Finance, that the same be now received and read for the first time.
Shall it carry? Overview, Minister.
This Films Act regulates the sale, rental, and distribution of films for use in video cassette recorders, video disc players, and similar devices. This act isn't needed anymore because of streaming services have replaced how the people watch movies.
Bill number 54, Films Act Statutes Repeal Act, read a first time.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land, Minister of Justice, Public Safety and Internal General.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to leave to introduce a bill to be intituled an act to repeal the Foreign Residents Corporations Act, and I move seconded by the Minister of Finance that the same be now received and read for the first time.
Shall it carry? Minister, overview.
This bill repeals the Foreign Residents Corporation Act for the wartime emergency situations. It allowed foreign corporations to make PEI their head office temporarily. This bill is no longer needed because of it's covered by the Business Corporations Act.
Bill number 67, an act to amend the Insurance Act, read a first time.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land, Minister of Justice, Attorney General and Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to introduce a bill to be intituled an act to repeal the Charities Act.
Yeah.
Got it right, sorry. I move seconded by the Minister of Finance, and the same be now received and read for the first time.
Shall it carry? Overview, Minister.
This bill repeals the Charities Act from 1955. It was to protect the public from fraudulent charities operating in our province. This act no longer is needed because of federal legislation.
Bill number 68, an act to amend the Survival of Actions Act. No, sorry, Mr. Speaker, I have the wrong bill. Sorry, Mr. Speaker. Bill number 56, an act to repeal the Charities Act.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land, Minister of Justice, Public Safety and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to introduce a bill to be intituled an act to amend the Lands Protection Act number 3, and I move second by the Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Communities that the same be now received and read for the first time.
Shall it carry? Overview, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in the sense of this housekeeping motion, but it is one that helps ensure the integrity and fairness under the Lands Protection Act in this province. The clause in question prevents double counting of certain lands in cases where the land is being leased out. Without these measures, the same parcel of land can be part of the holdings of both owners and the person leasing the property. The provision had been due to expire this year, and the amendment extends it to the end of 2029.
Bill number 64, an act to amend the Prince Edward Islands Land Protection Act, number 3, read a first time. And also, Mr. Speaker, my apologies. I read in first time, bill number 67 was read a first time. It was actually bill number 55, an act to repeal the Foreign Residential Corporations Act, read a first time.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land, Minister for Justice, Public Safety and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to leave to introduce a bill to be intituled the Act to Amend the Insurance Act. And I move seconded by the Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy that the same be now received and read for the first time.
Shall it carry? Overview, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this amendment is to align our acts so these other jurisdictions, the changes will also improve customer protection and choices.
Bill number 67, an act to amend the Insurance Act, read a first time.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land, Minister for Justice, Public Safety and Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I beg to leave to introduce a bill to be intituled an act to amend the Survival Actions Act, and I move seconded by the Minister of Health and Wellness that the same be now received and read for the first time.
Shall it carry? Overview, Minister?
This bill amends the Survival of Actions Act so that the public trustee doesn't automatically become the litigation administrator when their family member responsible for civil legislation matters. The bill also simplifies the language used in the act so it's easier to understand and more inclusive.
Bill number 68, an act to amend the Survival of Actions Act, read a first time.
Shall it carry? Carry. That's better. No more bills? That's a lot, that's right. Motions other than government? Oh, you got a bill. I'm sorry. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill to be intituled an Act to amend the Dog Act, and I move, seconded by the member from Charlottetown Victoria Park, that the same be now received and read a first time.
Shall carry. Overview.
Thank you.
Overview, Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Parts 1 and 2 of the Dog Act, which Parts 1 and 2 of the Dog Act address dog licenses and dogs running at large, respectively, but they do not apply to municipalities. However, a regulatory void is created when municipalities do not have bylaws regarding dogs. This bill amends the Dog Act to make these parts of the Act apply to municipalities unless that municipality has adopted a bylaw respecting dog licenses and dogs running at large. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Bill number 121, an act to amend the Dog Act, read a first time.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Member from Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill to be intituled the Election Age Act, and I move, seconded by the member from Charlottetown Belvedere, that the same be now received and read a first time.
Shall it carry? Overview, Member.
The Election Age Act would lower the age qualification to vote in a provincial or municipal election to 16 years of age.
Bill number 122, Election Age Act, read a first time.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Member from Charlottetown Belvedere. How could I forget?
Exactly. How could you forget, Mr. Speaker? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to seek unanimous consent to call motion 90.
Honourable Members, do we have unanimous consent to call motion 90? Yes. You have unanimous consent.
Mr. Speaker, I call the motion number 90 be now read.
Shall it carry?
Motion number 90, encouraging islands and government to support local. The Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford moves, seconded by the Honourable Member from Charlottetown Belvedere, the following motion. Whereas the COVID-19 pandemic has led to a significant change in consumer behavior with large amounts of purchasing moving online, and whereas the pandemic may reduce opportunities to buy local, such as craft fairs, in the lead up to the holiday season, and whereas buying local creates major benefits for employees, local businesses, local communities, and the entire island economy, and whereas many island businesses that have been negatively affected by the COVID-19 pandemic can now more than ever benefit from the support of both governments and islanders in general, therefore be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly encourage islanders to continue to buy as local as possible this holiday season and beyond. Therefore, be it further resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge government to be responsive, flexible, and innovative in how it supports island businesses through the COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, be it further resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge government to use its purchasing power to support local businesses as much as possible.
The Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford to start debate.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to bring this motion forward. When we look across this island, we see many businesses that are really the lifeline to our communities and to the island and the residents that live in it. Supporting our local shops and businesses on the island has always been important, but now it's even more important to show them our support. Something that we did see as soon as COVID hit, people looking to support our island producers as they saw unprecedented orders to come in very quickly. The COVID-19 pandemic has been particularly devastating for many local businesses, with a shortened and small tourism season and more people moving to purchase goods online through mega retailers like Amazon. And something that I heard throughout COVID was from Canada Post was they've never seen the volumes of packages, even around Christmas time. And so when you think about Amazon, though, you think it's convenient. And at this point in time, as islanders, we need to look past convenience and we need to look towards intentional purchasing, intentional buying. My sister lived in Ottawa, and as I've driven to and from Ottawa several times, I've seen the new Amazon warehouse. And I know I have a lot of hockey fans in the house today. To point out the size of that warehouse, it is equivalent to the size of 60 hockey rinks. You think about the size of that building. Amazon doesn't need our support. Amazon's doing just fine. But our local vendors, our local businesses, and they truly, going into the Christmas season or the holiday season and beyond, are really concerned about what's going to happen to them from January until April, to when our next tourism season hopefully will begin. Those are the ones that we need to look at intentionally supporting in the upcoming months. That's why I want to encourage all islanders to buy local as much as possible this holiday season and beyond, because when you buy local, you're not just purchasing quality, unique products. The money you spend stays in the local economy. Producers and makers, they get paid fairly, and local jobs are created and they're maintained. There are also so many different ways that we can buy local, whether it's in your own community, whether it's in the province, or whether it's the Atlantic region, or even online. We did see government put out a really good program that helped island businesses pivot, and many of them used that in order to go online. And we've heard when our caucus had the opportunity to tour many local businesses within our districts, we heard from local businesses that used that support. It was a good program, and it provided them with resources that they didn't, with skill sets that they didn't have. What was interesting is something that they did say was that a similar program like that would actually allow them to use it in a broader sense. So maybe they need an accountant to help them next, or maybe they need something else. So it's not the criteria is not so condensed into just online sales. But we have a lot of businesses here in PEI that do sell online. And again, it takes intentional buying from islanders to find and seek out those businesses, because we recognize that we have very innovative businesses all throughout the province. This summer also, the government launched the Buy Local gift card program that was very popular. It sold out, I believe, in 4 days. So that just goes to show how supportive islanders want to be when we help them actually and enable. I think that's important as the government enables that. Islanders stepped up to show their support, and we've seen that over and over again since the beginning of COVID. Everyone has varying capacity to shop local, so we encourage islanders to make an extra effort when they can, and for government to support this effort. We know that the pandemic is one of the many challenges facing businesses here on our island. As I mentioned, we had toured many of our districts and we visited many different businesses over the last 6 weeks. And we've seen how and heard how COVID has impacted them, as well as other challenges. I mean, in my district, we heard from a travel agent whose business was supposed to be probably one of the busiest seasons that they've ever seen. And that business just disintegrated, just disappeared in a blink of an eye down to pretty much nothing. And when you think about what a travel agent does, I mean, obviously people aren't traveling at this point in time, but a travel agent then works in order to try to retain that business by cancellations and rebooking, and that's a huge amount of work. I also heard from a gym in my district who was shut down, and this is a boutique gym in which people socially distance anyway when they're in there, but blanket policies do impact businesses, and I think we need to be very, very cautious as to when we apply a blanket policy, because it's not a one-size-fits-all for our local businesses. We've seen how innovative our businesses have been in order to adapt and survive this new normal, and to appreciate that, again, I'm going to say intentional a lot during this motion, because it's not easy. It's not convenient. Going online, I believe Amazon, there was a report for Amazon that said at least 60% of your searches for an item starts with Amazon. So what Amazon has actually done is they have made it difficult for vendors to actually sell online, because they've made themselves the place that you need to go. So what they've done is they've forced vendors to actually sell on Amazon. And one of the statistics that I read was 1 out of every $2 in the US is spent for online shopping is spent on Amazon. But Amazon, we don't even see tax dollars from that corporation. We do not realize any of that revenue. There's no jobs created by shopping at Amazon. So when you shop at a local business, we heard from one of my constituents when we visited them, that's baseball for their son. When you actually purchase from them, it's huge. It saves jobs. It creates jobs. It creates jobs for your neighbors. It creates jobs for your friends. It's just so important. As we continue to navigate the pandemic, we encourage government to be equally flexible and responsive to the needs of local businesses. Some of the feedback that we received is businesses have to move fast. If they're going to be a leader, if they're going to be innovative, they have to move fast. But what we heard was red tape within government really hinders them from being able to move as quickly as they need to move. One statement was, government doesn't move at the speed as business. And so one of the things that I brought away from that is, what if every single department found one area that they could improve in order to make businesses' lives a little bit easier, business owners a little bit easier? So maybe it's not, 6 or 8 weeks to get a building permit. Maybe it's not, waiting for a response in economic growth and development. Whatever that, maybe identify what that bottleneck is so that you could actually remove a struggle for business owners. And if we do that intentionally as government, as well as purchase locally and procure locally, we can change lives in our business owners. And those business owners are islanders, and it's so important over the next 6 months that we support them without even giving that a second thought. So it's my honor to bring this motion forward, and thank you, Mr. Speaker, for letting me speak, and thank you for the unanimous consent.
Now I'll call on the seconder of the motion, the honourable member from Charlottetown, Belvedere, and the opposition, House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a privilege to get to speak to this motion today on the opening day of the sitting. Like many in the House, I have been hearing continually from constituents and businesses, not just in my district, but from across the province. And as my colleague mentioned, we had the opportunity to visit with a number of businesses across the province during our recent caucus tour. And there were some really common themes that we heard in that tour with all of those, local businesses, some of them that have been around for 30, 40 years, and some that were really new. And it was about how proud they were to be a business located in PEI, how much it meant to them. Some of these businesses, they had moved from across the country or around the world to set up business here. They chose here to make their business work. They were in rural spaces, they were in urban spaces, a whole range of different organizations and sizes, but the common theme was pride in the work that they did, pride in being a PEI company, but also real worry about not just whether their business was going to survive over the next few years, but whether their businesses are going to be able to look the same, and how they can manage to keep up and adapt. A lot of that responsibility is because when businesses start, you know, a small business owner, then you're employing yourself, or maybe yourself and your family. And as businesses grow, they begin to employ people in the community, and there's a responsibility there. So one of the things that we felt was important when we brought forward this motion was to sort of ensure that we're not saying that this is government's responsibility. Government has a role in this, as do the citizens of the island, whether they're business owners or not. And sometimes we need to be reminded of that civic responsibility. We have a contract with each other that we can and should do what we need to make our community stronger. And sometimes we forget that that includes thinking mindfully about where we spend our money. But we know that local dollars have what's called the multiplier effect. There's lots of great economic theory about it, but it's a pretty straightforward idea. Every dollar spent in a local business multiplies itself throughout the community and strengthens the economic base. A higher proportion of money re-spent in the local economy means a higher multiplier effect because more income is generated for local people. From an economic perspective, from a social economic perspective, the most meaningful thing we can do is to spend our money mindfully with a local business. It means that, as we heard, the money is not only going directly to a manufacturer or producer, but it indirectly then means that those wages remain here, that people can afford childcare, that they can afford to get gas, that they can pay their rent. And you know, these seem like really simple things, but this is actually the underpinning of how our economy works. One of the things that we tend to think about, although we've heard a bit about, you know, we think about support local means I go and buy my greens from, you know, the Riverview Market, or I go to the farmer's market on the weekend, or I do a CSA, or I go to a craft fair. But supporting local also means that you make sure that your charitable dollars go to local island charities that are doing direct work. We know that our food bank literally is the matter between life and death for way too many island families. And that food is donated by islanders to islanders, for people who have to the people who don't. It's distributed locally, it's managed locally, and yes, there's money that comes in from other places, but it's islanders giving to islanders that makes that work. I can talk at length about why that's not a great thing, but it's what we've got. And over again, you know, we know that the money that matters the most when it comes to charitable donations and the money that you put into local organizations that make a difference are the ones that are directly impacting islander to islander. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't still give, if you can, to those larger and more national organizations, but think mindfully about that direct help that you can have, because there's less to go around right now. That also means that we need to think about local means those non-profit organizations that I often talk about, because they employ 6,500 islanders. We need to keep them vital. We need to keep them working. We need to make sure that those jobs are saved, because those jobs are jobs that then support so many others in our community, particularly when the number of professionals who work in those organizations are women. From a government perspective, there are some things that we can ask, and I know that I'd like to, at this point, recognize and commend the Minister for Economic Development, Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture, every time, because his department not only were exemplary in the programs that they rolled out during COVID, but they have been probably one of the most responsive departments in terms of meeting and addressing the changing needs of the business climate. Exactly. It's, you know, we've always said we'll give credit where credit is due, and it is a recurring theme from particularly from some small businesses that previously were not able to access supports, that the range of programs and the responsiveness of the department to sort of make those programs work, in particular to help businesses pivot. And that's been one of the things that small businesses in PEI have been able to do with support through some of the funds, is to find ways to do businesses in new formats, including moving online. So we have the sad news that a local business may close its street presence, but the good news that they're able to open online and perhaps generate new business and new revenue through an online sales. We don't want to see those businesses close, but we recognize we'd rather have them employed and working in a different way. That online presence may sound like a small thing, but it's a huge value to a business to get some financial assistance to make that happen. And it's one of those areas where generally businesses that don't export and businesses that are very small or very new traditionally haven't gotten support from the government, Mr. Speaker. They haven't met the criteria that says that they are businesses that we can comfortably invest in. I'm really hopeful that with some of the early programs that are rolling out from Innovation PEI and the team at the Minister's Department, that they will continue to be open-minded about what business actually looks like, because we know that 97% of the businesses in PEI are small businesses, that those businesses are the ones that are the least likely to qualify for federal things like a wage subsidy or a large loan. And they are the ones that have used up their cash, they have used up all their reserves, and they're looking at a long, bleak winter. So anything that we can do to be creative, to be open-minded, and to be more flexible in how we can help them. Because the hardest thing for one of those businesses, when you've put your blood, sweat, and tears into a business, like some of the ones that we visited on our tours, and they will stand there and say, I just don't understand why it has to be so hard. And you're standing there saying, you know what, I don't understand either. Because you're doing the right thing, you're working, you're creating a business, you're employing people, and there's barrier after barrier after barrier. So I look forward to a day when we can begin to pull some of those barriers down, and I really look forward to that day being quite soon. But in the meantime, what we want to do is ensure that businesses don't close. The hard reality is that not every business is going to make it through this period. There are lots of things that are part of a factor, and even in times when we don't have a pandemic, the success rate for entrepreneurship is hard. It is not an industry, no matter what industry you're in, a small business, chance of success over a longer period of time is not great. It's about 50%. In a pandemic, we don't know what that's going to look like, but it's going to be hard. So what we want to do is ensure that we have done the most that we can to save as many businesses as we can. Because when we save a business, whether it's a non-profit organization or a micro business that makes crafts, or a food producer, or a big manufacturer, or anything in between, we're not just saving that business, we're saving the people that work there and their families and the communities that they live in. And that, Mr. Speaker, is really what we're here to do. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to this motion today on the importance of supporting local and the context of that and how much it matters to us and what we do here in the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member from Mermaid Stratford for putting this motion forward. Supporting local is something that I'm very passionate about and practice in my everyday life. Mr. Speaker, I believe that supporting local is a mindset. It's a conscious choice. It's having the mindful awareness that if you buy something local, you recognize how much that directly impacts and supports another islander. Because when you shop local, you're supporting your community. You're supporting a farmer. You're supporting a fisher. You're supporting a family. You're supporting a small business. You're supporting the staff that serve you. You're supporting a mom and pop shop. You're supporting an island-owned business that directly contributes to our provincial economy. And Mr. Speaker, we've really seen over the last 6 months, islanders really step up and support the small business community and support local. When we first started talking about it, we didn't know what it looked like. COVID was a new experience, but we really seen islanders, your neighbors, your friends, everybody come together and really support and get out and support their small business community. Mr. Speaker, whether it's where I choose to buy my groceries, what type of produce, meat, or fish I eat, where I buy my clothes, where I buy toys for my children. I'm always doing my best to support local. Mr. Speaker, over these past few months, my department has been working hard to support local. We are all very aware of the impact COVID-19 has had on our island businesses, and we are doing everything we can to support them during these challenging times. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about two initiatives our department has been working on. The first is the Canada's Food Island Gift Card Program, as the Honourable Member mentioned. On September 28th, together with Food Island Partnership PEI, we launched the Canada's Food Island Gift Card Program. These gift cards encourage islanders and visitors to buy and spend locally. Whether it's golfing, shopping, or dining, this is easy to use and is island-wide. These cards currently come with 20% discount. So for an example, a $50 Canada's Food Island gift card is sold for $40, Mr. Speaker. This discount will be available until supplies last or until this Saturday, November 15th. We sold the first cards out in 4 days, Mr. Speaker, and then I believe there was another 15,000 cards have come in, and we've seen how quick they've sold. It's unreal, the tremendous support from Islanders. Mr. Speaker, I encourage all Islanders and all members of this Legislative Assembly to purchase a gift card if you haven't already done so. There are currently 175 merchants who accept the gift cards island-wide, and this list of merchants grows daily. The second initiative I'd like to talk about is our department's partnering with all the chambers across PEI on the Love Local PEI campaign. Mr. Speaker, there will be two phases to this campaign. Phase 1 will focus on the holiday season, encouraging Islanders to buy gifts and enjoy holiday celebrations locally. Phase 2 will focus on the winter months, encouraging Islanders to get out to shops, restaurants, and other local businesses in the colder months when our local businesses need it most. Mr. Speaker, we look forward to sharing more details on the Love Local PEI campaign very soon. When Islanders choose to support local, we are celebrating and thanking our neighbors, our friends, and our family. Mr. Speaker, it is because of the hardworking Islanders and a determined business community that we've been able to weather one of the most challenging times in our province history. COVID-19 has forced our business community to adapt in unimaginable ways. So now, more than ever, we need to support local businesses as we all learn to live with COVID-19. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to support this motion, and I encourage all Islanders to think and shop local this holiday season. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I too am proud to stand to support this motion. You know, buying local and supporting local businesses is something that I've been passionate about for many years now. When I sat across in opposition, it was something I asked questions on many times. And even before politics, it was something that really was something I wanted to see. Mr. Speaker, I wanted to share a couple of stories about initiatives. As an entrepreneur, a fledgling entrepreneur, I tried to start off. There was one. I'm a web developer by trade, Mr. Speaker, and so back in about 2005, I thought, you know, this buy, sell, and trade is quite the application. This is a great way for people local to be able to not only you know, support the local economy, but to reuse items so they don't go to waste, don't go to landfills. I always had a very keen environmental slant, of course, as a progressive conservative. And so, Mr. Speaker, I said, I'm going to start this tool that's going to allow it to do things like that they do with the buy, sell, and trade. We're going to do that online. It's going to be called PEIstuffonline.com. And so I worked at that because, of course, this was, I was also working as a consultant at the time and at the Canada Revenue Agency as a senior systems analyst. So this was a full-time contract gig. I was one of the, you know, we're right in there with the gig economy back before it was a trendy thing to call it. But anyway, I worked hard on that evenings and weekends, and it was a couple of days before launch. And I was going to work that day in Summerside at the Canada Revenue Agency, and I pulled into the Tim Hortons to get a coffee, and there was this great big sign there, usedpei.com. I said, oh my goodness, what is that? well, needless to say, they kind of had the same idea and released about the week before I was ready to release, Mr. Speaker. And then the next week, there was this little company that was backed by eBay, a little company called Kijiji. And it came online the next week. And so, Mr. Speaker, I launched anyhow, and I had this fledgling PEIstuffonline.com, and it was well received. But, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to relate that story about some of the entrepreneurial insights that I gained about competition and how hard it is, but as well as my passion for supporting local. So, as we know now, those are very much household names, like Kijiji in particular, and it's used a lot. But of course, to the point of some of the other members talking about, any revenues generated by Kijiji really probably don't stay on the island. They're going to a big company called eBay off island, and that's why local companies are so important, even in areas where you think you might not be able to compete. So, Mr. Speaker, I would definitely encourage that, and the term that I've heard used, and I'm not sure if members have used it today, is really import replacement. And there are just massive opportunities out there to replace imports by manufacturing or creating them on island. And I think, the Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism, Culture has done a great job in supporting local businesses, but I look forward to even more initiatives that will support those going forward in the income replacement area. And Mr. Speaker, one of the areas that has come to me time and time again as an MLA from constituents and from producers is in the area of food. Because what could be more local than food? I mean, can you imagine that New Zealand lamb coming to Prince Edward Island, Mr. Speaker? How many thousands of miles? What is the footprint of a New Zealand lamb by the time it comes to a grocery store shelf here on Prince Edward Island? And of course, the money and the profit is not going to the local community. Mr. Speaker, I mean, next door to me, the Harvey and Kathy McDonald have a fantastic sheep farm. And over the last 15 years, we've seen the number of farms increase in number on PEI, in particular in that area. And I wonder if today, if I go to buy some lamb, in fact, it mostly is Prince Edward Island lamb on the shelf. But, Mr. Speaker, I think islanders are really uptaking the amount of food that they produce, and they want it to be produced locally. There's lots of great businesses, whether they be community-supported agriculture, as was mentioned, the CSAs, or whether it be businesses that are innovative. I mean, speaking of sheep, Mr. Speaker, there's a sheep dairy that was started just in North Rustico, and Ile Saint Jean Farms. Great young couple, again, Deirdre Duran, now Deirdre Mercier, came back to the island and brought with her Gabrielle Mercier, her husband from Quebec. They met, I think they were both diving in the naval reserves, Mr. Speaker. And they said, let's start this business. Like, why not? Well, there's many benefits, and they did, and they got supports. There's a French version of the Dragon's Den on the island here. Maybe the minister can remind me what that's called, but pardon me? The Ignition Fund, thank you. And there's a great way for island entrepreneurs to get a kickstart. Anyways, they won the French version of the Ignition Fund, and they got the money, and they invested, and they started their business, and they've collaborated, I believe, with other new islanders that I believe a Mennonite farm that they're working with now, and it's been a struggle for them, but their product is just unbelievable, and they really did receive a lot of community support. But I think we can do more, because businesses like that, they do struggle, and it's hard to find markets and hard to get the products there. In particular, because I think people, when it comes to food, like the convenience of going to a large big box store and seeing everything there. I know I myself fall into that trap, and really not all the food is very clearly labeled as to where it comes from, and it's hard to know if you're buying local or not. You're like, I need some hamburger, and there's some hamburger on the shelf, and well, you think maybe it is local, but unless you read the fine print, it's got Brampton, Ontario written on it perhaps, you know? And so you want to stay away from that. And so I think we're seeing change though, Mr. Speaker. We're seeing that stores like Sobeys are carrying more local meats. They're showcasing island beef. We see other big chains that are doing the same, maybe in a more slow fashion. But I really loved it when I can go in and I can see Larkin Brothers Poultry, Mr. Speaker, for example, another local producer in my area. So, Mr. Speaker, one of the other things that has been talked about here is, you know, what is the role of government in all this? And I tend to agree with most of the comments made that, you know, government is an enabler. And again, I think, you know, the administration that we have right now, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Economic Growth through Agriculture, the Minister of Agriculture, everybody is looking to support and drive business, not to grow government. And but one thing again that I fought for time and time again on that side is when we go out to government tenders for products, how can we buy local? And in particular, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to food, the provincial protein tender was one that really, really stuck in my craw, Mr. Speaker, because not only were local products not encouraged, Mr. Speaker, every single line item actually recommended off-island companies, in particular for the value-added products, Mr. Speaker. And it's something that I know the members of the legislature that have been around for a while have heard me talk about again and again. And Mr. Speaker, not only did I talk about it, but my predecessor in District 18 Rustico Emerald, Carolyn Bertram, talked about it time and time again and fought and fought and fought to try and get this. Well, Mr. Speaker, working with the Minister of Finance and the great people in her department, I'm really pleased to stand here today and say that finally the provincial protein tender does not favor off-island products anymore. It does not list them as recommended in the tender. And not only that, Mr. Speaker, because of the great work by the Minister of Finance and her department, what's that? we now allow for the provincial protein tender 2 bids to be placed for any given line item. One that's a local bid and one that's the low cost bid, so that local producers now can actually have their bids considered, Mr. Speaker. This is a huge deal. This is massive. And right now, Mr. Speaker, we've seen the percentage of local purchasing that's on the provincial tender go up by a huge amount. And maybe the Minister of Finance can remind me, I believe it's gone to from like 2% to 20% or somewhere along those lines. So it's working, Mr. Speaker. But the best thing is, Mr. Speaker, that now that local bids can be considered, all those value-added products that food's being imported, now local producers can look at them and say, I know I have a market, I have a base. This is product the government was buying anyway, and if I can come up with that value-added product, that chicken nugget, for example, or chicken tender, then I know I have the base and I can grow from there, Mr. Speaker. And so this is just a fantastic change, and I wanted to congratulate the Minister of Finance and congratulate all the local producers, and I want to make sure that they're aware, Mr. Speaker, of this change so that this can happen. And Mr. Speaker, this is something that's been long overdue. So along those lines, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to talk about some other government initiatives that I've looked at my colleagues and seen what they're doing. Maybe I'll start off with one in my own department, Education and Lifelong Learning. We worked closely with Social Development and Housing in the beginning, but this is the school food program, Mr. Speaker. And one of the pillars of the school food program is we want to buy local produce. And Mr. Speaker, I'll be the first to admit that we're not 100% there yet. We've got a ways to go. But that's the goal, that's the plan, and that's where we're moving towards. So we're not only providing healthy school food to our children in a pay-what-you-can model, so that no child is sitting in school without having the nourishment they need. But Mr. Speaker, we're doing that in a way that supports our local food producers, and this is just a fantastic story. This is something that government can do and is doing to support local. Now, the other thing, Mr. Speaker, that I've talked about time and time again in this legislature in the past, you know, in my 5 years as an MLA, is, and before, Mr. Speaker, in fact, is energy. We know we spend a ton of money as households, residences, and businesses on energy that primarily is imported, Mr. Speaker. And so the profits from that energy, where does it go? It goes off the island, out of the island economy. As the member across said, we don't see the multiplier effect. And there's no reason why we can't produce our own energy. And I know that's something, this is a view that many members across and many members across the House share. And so this is why, I mean, I'm just so proud to be part of a government that's moving forward with ambitious policies and initiatives that are going to support the production of local energy. For example, Mr. Speaker, there's the Sustainable Communities Initiative that the Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy talked about. So this is a chance for communities to come up with projects where they can generate revenue that goes back into the community by doing things that are sustainable, like creating their own energy. And beyond, Mr. Speaker, if you look back to the Facebook Live that the Minister did during the heart of the pandemic back in May, he talks about, and he learned a lot of these from the SAMSO experience. I know there's members across that traveled to SAMSO with him. The Sustainable Communities Initiative, it goes beyond energy. It can be the solar panels, it can be the wind turbines, but it can be the bank of electric vehicles that are available and for share by a community, for rental or share. But it can be things outside of the box thinking. For example, imagine if we had greenhouses, year-round greenhouses that were community-owned, that produce food, so we didn't have to import those vegetables in the middle of the winter from off-island, Mr. Speaker. There you go. So the options really are endless, Mr. Speaker, and I want to appeal to all the MLAs in this House here today to get that message out to their communities if they haven't been already, because that always is a challenge, is the communication. Make sure we mobilize our communities so that we get those expressions of interest in there so that we can move forward with sustainable communities. And Mr. Speaker, that's something, I mean, I'm working with that in my district, in my community, and it's a challenge, it really is, to find the time and the effort to get those expressions of interest together. But I think if we all work really as a core duty of our MLA to make sure we get that message out there, we can make very, very good progress. The other initiative that this government just recently announced, again, it is through Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy, but I know that the Minister of Environment, Water and Climate Change has had a key role in this, and has her department, in particular on the climate change front, will be informing this ongoing, is the net zero initiatives. So these are really bold targets, right? Reaching net zero energy by 2030, net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. Leading the country, Mr. Speaker. That's what this government is about. That's what this administration is about, and it makes me so proud to be part of it. And Mr. Speaker, in order to get there, we're going to have to be innovative, and we're going to have to do import replacement, in particular on the energy front. And again, I think there's lots of really bold ideas out there. We talk about electric vehicles. I myself, you know, might drool now and again over a Tesla that I see online. I think I probably hovered over that button 100 or 150 times just saying, oh, should I order, and I haven't done it. But imagine, Mr. Speaker, if we had electric vehicles that were built on the island. You know, perhaps we take used vehicles, Mr. Speaker, and convert them to electric vehicles. I know this is something that people have talked about, you know, and we have the expertise. Right now, we have a huge downturn in the aerospace industry because planes aren't flying, and of course, when planes aren't flying, then you don't need mechanics to refurbish engines to put in them. But guess what skills they have? They have skills working with vehicles. They have skills working in that area. Maybe what we can convert to is is some way, shape, or form of converting vehicles to electric. You know, these opportunities there, and I know that my colleagues here in the government caucus support that, and I know that my colleagues across the floor support that. So I think we're just at the very beginning. We've laid the foundation, and we are going to see amazing things to come on Prince Edward Island to support local and not just local small business, but local big business. That's going to have a profound impact on the island economy as well as the island sustainability. Another initiative, Mr. Speaker, that this government is undertaking, and it's really as a direct result of COVID we've been able to move forward with this, and it's really on the ability of government employees to work from home. This is something that will impact support local, because I know as a rural community, it's frustrating for local businesses when every day the people in their community leave the community and go somewhere else. And it costs a lot of money too, Mr. Speaker, to do that. And of course, there's the environmental impact side of things with the fuel, the emissions from the fuel and that sort of thing. But with distributed government offices and the ability for government employees to work from home, that's going to bolster local businesses. I think that, you know, those employees will have more money in their pocket because they're traveling less. They'll have a little more time on their hands, and then they can go out and they can support local businesses. And so that's a policy that we have in this government. I believe that we're asking across all departments for employees to be able to work from home 2 to 3 days a week, or from a distributed government office 2 to 3 days a week. And then that's amazing. Now, I mean, there are critics of that. In particular, what we have to do is make sure that the larger urban centers like Summerside and Charlottetown don't end up with their businesses closing down because they don't have those employees coming in. But I think we're going to be able to work through that, Mr. Speaker. And again, the opportunities are huge, and we're going to see some amazing things on Prince Edward Island as we move forward on this. So when it comes to supporting local, I agree wholeheartedly with this motion. And I think we need to think big when we're thinking about this. I think this government is laying the foundations and the policies to make this happen. And I believe that there's a lot more that we're going to do and we're going to see coming out of this going forward. And a lot of it's going to come from communities. So, Mr. Speaker, in closing, I just wanted to say that I definitely plan to do my Christmas shopping locally this year. And I'm sure that the vast majority of MLAs in here do as well. And I think if we look for opportunities, as the member Cross said, it's the personal responsibility of every one of us to support our friends and neighbors in our local communities. And this will be one of the very positive things that is a legacy of COVID. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise today, and I want to thank the Honourable Member for this motion, encouraging Islanders and government to support local. Mr. Speaker, local businesses are the heart and soul of our island. These local businesses are there for us in our day-to-day lives, and many of us can sometimes take that for granted. They provide convenience and enjoyment, they help us unwind, and they make Prince Edward Island the province we know and love. Quite often they are owned and operated by our neighbours, our friends, our families, fostering that sense of community wherever they are located, as well as employing people in their local communities. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a challenging experience for many small businesses. Many of them depended on the tourist boom this summer, which we all know did not occur. These small businesses have always been there for us and our communities when we needed them, whether it's supporting a local event or donating to many worthy causes. These businesses now need our support. So I encourage all Islanders to get out and purchase some of your goods or supplies at one of our many fantastic small businesses. I also would like to thank the Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture for his programs that he implemented. But I'd also like to remind him that the Minister to continue to look at programs to help these local businesses going forward and remain open and continue to employ Islanders. And was glad to hear from the Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning that he's happy about some of the procurement purchases. And I do encourage this government, now is the time more than ever to be buying stuff locally. And I know that the procurement agreement affects other provinces, but I'm sure they're looking after their residents as well. So if we can buy locally for whatever purchase government has to make, I encourage government to do that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land, Minister of Justice, Public Safety, and Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member from Mermaid Stratford for this motion, and I'm pleased to support the aims of this motion. I do think government has a responsibility to look at local sources of food, really for all of its purchases as much as possible. Beyond that, I would agree that government should encourage islanders and island businesses to look at the island producers whenever they can. Earlier this year, we took steps to support our island agriculture industry and to counteract some of the worst effects of COVID-19, Mr. Speaker. The health and well-being of our community depends on the ready access to high-quality, healthy, safe food when we need to ensure that agriculture remains the pillar of our economy. Farming has helped build our province. We are proud to stand with our farmers and farm workers to help tackle the challenges of today and plan for the future. Government provides assistance to our potato sector, both in the processing and food and seed potato industries. We work with Ottawa to deliver the aid for the COVID-related expenses that our farmers have incurred. We have worked to address labor challenges, and we increase our investment in Farmers Talk to help deal with some of the mental and emotional challenges, Mr. Speaker, that these stressful days may be causing our farmers. Mr. Speaker, I thank the work of our island farmers. Agriculture has been the source of stability and prosperity the last summer. Islanders have never had to worry about access of food. Island workers have had reliable employment. We believe that the local economy, and we support the local agricultural economy. A pretty good example came from the Loving Local campaign that we held this summer. COVID forced the traditional spring launch of Burger Love to be delayed to this fall, Mr. Speaker. Agriculture Resources staff regrouped with a Loving Local campaign, Mr. Speaker. But Loving Local encouraged Islanders to be creative and take the challenge if home cooking and PEI grown ingredients. In the spirit of Burger Love, we encouraged Islanders to make creative, locally sourced meals to share their home cooking on social media. Local food producers were the key, but this campaign helped bring a bit of light to the earliest days of COVID-19 pandemic. We've undertaken a lot of initiatives to encourage local purchases during the past few months. Our agri-food growth program supported 35 projects helping primary producers sell directly to customers, Mr. Speaker. Our Who's Your Farmer campaign gave people a chance to thank and recognize their island producers. And of course, as the Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture pointed out, the Canada Food gift cards are still getting a lot of attention, Mr. Speaker. Another good example of the support local industry is the way we address the great potential of our island livestock industry, Mr. Speaker. The Department of Agriculture and Land would like to see a robust, vital livestock industry to improve profitability, capacity, and environmental sustainability in each of our livestock sectors. In 2019, the livestock industry on Prince Edward Island generated $150 million in farm cash receipts. We see potential for this to grow. The livestock, not just adding to our economy, but improving our soil health and strengthening the diversity of agriculture, Mr. Speaker. We will work with the industry stakeholders to develop livestock strategy for PEI. In addition to government working provincial slaughterhouses to upgrade their facilities, efforts are being made to expand provinces' slaughter capacity to collaborate with regional partners to make sure meat production is sustainable and profitable in this province. Looking to my own colleagues, I know that school lunch program, as Minister of Education pointed out, will be a great market for island produce, and that we'll try to use as much PEI-grown food as possible to feed our island students, Mr. Speaker. Last spring, we saw thousands of meals, each delivered through the PEI School Food Project, with many island agri-food producers contributing to the effect. I am confident that these contracts will reap benefits to both producers and the school systems in the days ahead. Throughout the pandemic, the Department of Agriculture and Land officials remained in close contact with the industry to identify and respond to local food supplier disruptions. During the pandemic, the Department of Agriculture and Land completed an economic analysis of Prince Edward Island's ability to be food self-sufficient. The analysts found that PEI is self-sufficient in many items, including potatoes, grains, milk, eggs, meat, and seafood. Mr. Speaker, we can essentially produce enough food for ourselves in this province while being exporters of these products as well. The Department of Agriculture and Land is committed to strengthening the community food security in Prince Edward Island. And I am aware that COVID-19 is increasing food security issues among families in PEI. In response to the pandemic, the department has taken extra measures to support food security. The department has increased monitoring of food security and has made strategic investments in strengthening food supply systems in PEI. Mr. Speaker, I want to comment the local food security and the local production. I am confident that these will remain components of a strong, diverse industry in our province, Mr. Speaker, and I hope yourself got out to enjoy Burger Love, Mr. Speaker, and as over $2.5 million was an economic spin-off of Burger Love, and I know myself I have maybe had too many of them, so thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and with that, I would like to adjourn debate on this motion for today.
Honourable members, debate has been adjourned. The honourable member from Charlottetown Belvedere and the opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to request unanimous consent on motion 88.
Honourable members, do we have unanimous consent? Yes. Honourable member, you have unanimous consent.
Mr. Speaker, I would now ask that motion 88 be now read.
Shall it carry?
Motion 88, calling on government to fund treatments available on the formulary for rare disease. The honourable member from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke moves, seconded by the honourable member from Cornwall Meadowbank, the following motion. Whereas those battling rare diseases often have limited options for life-extending or life-saving treatments, and whereas these individuals deserve the same access to formulary funding as individuals who are battling more common diseases, and whereas recently an islander was denied access to a medication that is currently on the provincial formulary and was prescribed by her physician, and whereas due to the heterogeneity and small patient numbers, larger studies are extremely difficult to complete for many rare diseases. The Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health therefore recommends that patients with rare diseases are treated accordingly to more common disease guidelines despite the lack of large randomized studies. And whereas the formulary review system in PEI does not recognize that the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technology in Health recommendation that although large randomized studies are very limited for certain types of rare disease, treatments that pose greater benefit to patients than risk should be provided and funded if they are on the provincial formulary and if prescribed. Therefore be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly calls on government to implement a protocol to enable funding for treatments available on the formulary for rare diseases. Therefore be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly calls on government to provide a more transparent and thoughtful response for formulary requests. Letters, both approvals and denials, should be produced and decisions justified with research.
Okay, I ask the honourable member from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke to start debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On September 10th, 2020, Lucy Markunas contacted me to let me know she was going to die. Lucy has an extremely rare form of cancer, collecting duct carcinoma, and though the medication prescribed by her oncologist is covered on the provincial formulary, her request to access funding for this medication was denied. The medication, nivolumab, I might have how you say that wrong, but costs approximately $7,000 a treatment. Lucy and her family have been able to cover the cost of her first treatments for this medication, and the results were extremely promising. However, there was no way she could afford to pay for this medication moving forward, and without it, she likely had only a few months, if not weeks, to live. Lucy reached out to me as the opposition critic for health and wellness, but she told me she didn't expect that I would be able to do anything about this, and certainly not before she passed away from her illness. She wanted to share this so I could do something or try to do something so that others may not have the same experience. Over the following weeks, we worked to first get clarity on what the criteria were exactly that her condition didn't meet. The letter Lucy received in response to her request was vague, providing no further evidence as to how this life or death decision had been made. We then scoured the most recent literature and research to find out what experts were recommending in cases like Lucy's. What we discovered is that the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health, CADTH, are the expert reviewers on which the PEI formulary base many of their funding decisions. CADTH usually base their recommendations on large-scale clinical trials, and the PEI formulary often follows their expert advice. However, in Lucy's case, PEI missed a critical recommendation from CADTH, from their Pan-Canadian Oncology Drug Review. They recommended that this drug be made available to patients with very rare cancers such as Lucy's, even with the absence of a large clinical trial. The small numbers of patients with rare diseases such as this make large clinical trials extremely, if not impossible, to hold. Therefore, CADTH often recommends that although large randomized studies are very limited for many rare diseases, treatment should be provided if it poses greater benefit to advanced stage patients than risk. This is a practical and important gap in our current provincial formulary's approach to defining criteria that are the requirement for basing these decisions. The simple fact that a disease may be too rare to test in large-scale studies drastically limits a physician's ability to prescribe and treat effectively. Lucy did not get to choose the type of cancer she is battling. And this medication was prescribed by her doctor and has greatly improved her quality of life and may even save it. The CADTH Pan-Canadian Oncology Drug Review recognizes that studies for cancers this rare are extremely difficult to complete. Lucy should be given the same chance to live as those with rare cancers, and there should be clearly defined processes to similarly assess other rare diseases. Additionally, basic consideration that those making medication requests that may be life or death decisions deserve to know how and why a decision has been made. A transparent and thoughtful response justified by research and evidence. While I am absolutely thrilled that Lucy's medication will now be covered and she will have a chance to live and thrive, it is incredibly frustrating that she had to take her very personal situation public to finally result in action. I can't imagine what it must have felt like to bring that fight to the media, requiring a level of bravery and self-sacrifice that no one should be forced to muster. That Lucy had to fight so hard to be given the chance to live when the medication she required was already on the provincial formulary, and she should have had access from the beginning, is heartbreaking. Like Lucy, I want to make sure that no Islander facing a rare disease has to face this again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Cornwall, Meadowbank, and the seconder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the information on this and bringing myself into this realm with Lucy's issues. I think, Mr. Speaker, we're all in this House and we're all trying to make the right decisions and do the right thing. And first of all, I'll commend the government today to to funding Lucy's diagnosis in regards to her treatment. But, Mr. Speaker, there is a flaw, and it's been pointed out by Lucy, and I think this Legislative Assembly and the government of PEI need to take a look at the process and protocol that entailed pointing out this flaw. And I think it's extremely important, and I can remember, Mr. Speaker, as being chair of Treasury Board in 2 cases that I remember, and there may be more, but there was one case where a rare cancer was found in an individual. And for this individual to carry on life for a minimal of the next 3 to 5 years, the cost to the government at the time was $1 million per year. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, it's tough decisions like that, but they shouldn't be tough. And there should be a plan in place. The drug wasn't on the formulary at the time. So we put the drug on the formulary and we paid for that rare cancer. Another one, Mr. Speaker, was a gentleman in my area, and I think it was about $250,000 per year for that cancer drug, which wasn't on the formulary, and we put it on. So I think, you know, the formulary review system does not recognize some of the recommendations by CADTH. In the absence of large-scale studies, as the MLA described, we need to step outside the box on these situations. We can't judge all these types of critical situations the same. Each one of them are going to be different, much so similar to mental health. And I think our government and the bureaucrats behind the government in the minister's office needs to really look at the process and protocol that we desire as islanders to ensure that nobody is left behind. And I think that's the real reason. And we all know someone in our families who had an illness that could cause death or will cause death in the future. We've all lived it. We've all seen it. And, you know, if there's any chance of hope, Mr. Speaker, for us to give that person and their family some satisfaction for the remainder of their life, to try to accomplish providing them with a safe and secure drug to ensure that they can live a longer life, and to who knows how long, maybe forever, maybe not. But I think, you know, life is immeasurably valuable, and I don't think money should be tied to it. And I think if each and every one of us in here views this recommendation and this motion, I think, because who knows, it could be one of us tomorrow, it could be one of our children tomorrow. So, you know what, this is a time that we can get this right, and kudos again to the government for coming forth. I don't think anybody else should have to go through what Lucy went through, and I hope this motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first and foremost, I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Tyne Valley Sherbrooke for bringing this motion forward and the tremendous advocacy work that she did for Lucy. Just recently, we were at the hotel down the street, and we had the Health PEI AGM when the question period came up. One of the very first questions was by Lucy, and the CEO of Health PEI appropriately took the question and promised to have a side conversation following that meeting, which that did take place. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm also very, very excited that this drug was approved for this individual. And Mr. Speaker, as the Honourable Member for Cornwall Meadowbank talked about, it shouldn't be about money, and it should definitely not be about money. It should be about compassion. It should be about lives. It should be about helping our neighbours and helping fellow islanders. Mr. Speaker, I've got speaking notes here that goes on about the relationship with Health Canada, the Canadian Agency of Drugs and Technologies in Health, also known as CADTH. I can go on and on and on with regards to the process and how drugs are approved or how drugs are not approved. But Mr. Speaker, all that's for naught if we're not doing the right thing. Mr. Speaker, there is a process in place. Is it perfect? No. Can it be improved? Yes. But Mr. Speaker, first and foremost, we need to listen to the advice of our clinicians. We need to listen to the advice of the experts that study these drugs, that are either oncologists or pharmaceutical pharmacy experts. to make sure that we're coming towards the best solutions possible. Mr. Speaker, you know, there was a period of time not long ago where I think it was about a 3 or 4 year period where there was no movement on adding high-cost drugs to the formulary. Since this government has come into place, we've added, I believe it's upwards now of 13 new drugs, high-cost drugs to the formulary. Can we do better? Yes. Are we going to do better? We're going to continue to try. But Mr. Speaker, as I said, I have speaking notes here on lots of other policies and procedures to add new drugs. But at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, the reason I'm standing is to say I'm in full support of this motion. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker, and I wanted to rise in support of this motion. Lucy Markunis is my constituent, and I know her and her family, and she came to me in the spring, and this is something that we've been working with the Department of Health and the Minister of Health from that time onwards. I want to thank the Minister of Health and his department for approving the funding so she can continue her treatment. I want to thank the opposition critic, the member from Tyne Valley, for her work advocating as well. You know, this is why our system works the way it does. Sometimes it needs that little extra push, you know, from opposition. But I think in the end, you know, Lucy's getting the help she needs, and I'm just so thankful for that, for her and her family. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I will be very short because I would like this to come to a vote. I think it's important that, lest we imagine this is an isolated or unique case, that the House knows that I was contacted by a constituent of mine in District 17 with an almost identical situation just a couple of days ago. Somebody who their treatment is not curable, but it's certainly treatable, and 47-year-old individual who lives in my district, and the medication is on the formulary, temozolomide. Specifically for one type of cancer, this person has a different type of cancer. A drug on the formulary should be covered regardless of whether it is specific for one or another, if it is proven to be efficacious for that. So I just wanted to make sure that this was not, and I know Lucy too, she was a patient of mine when I was a dentist. I know her and her family well, and my heart goes out to her, but it's important that we recognize this is not an isolated incident. There are probably many islanders in situations like this, and I rise, as everybody else has done, to support this motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, anyone else that would like to speak to the motion? If not, I'll go to the mover of the motion, Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to briefly thank the members of this legislature for allowing this to come to debate today, and for the support from those who have spoken. I do want to highlight that Lucy came to me after having gone, trying to get this covered through the formulary process and reaching out, to her MLA as well, and she felt that there was nothing else that could be done. And in fact, as I said, she told me she was going to die and that she had no hope for her own case, but was hoping I could do something for others. So again, I am so thankful that she will be able to get the medication she needs. And I want to commend Lucy on her bravery for bringing this forward, because I can't imagine how difficult that must have been. Very quickly, I also do want to highlight something that the minister just mentioned, the increase in drugs being covered on the formulary, which is of course a very good thing. Some of that is due to drugs turning over to the generic status, which decreases their cost. So it allowed for more drugs to be added to the formulary. That's a factor that needs to be taken into account. And we do still have the lowest drug coverage, if not the lowest, one of the lowest in terms of oncology in the country. So we have a lot of work to do there. Now, in terms of this particular motion, this is a very specific motion talking about what we need to do in terms of rare disease, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to bring this forward today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Oh, do I need to say vote? I'd like to call for a vote. Thank you. Sorry.
Honourable members, there has been a vote to be called, and all those in favour of the motion, please raise your your hands. All those against the motion, please raise your hand. Honorable member, your motion passed unanimously. Honorable members, the hour has been called. We will recess until 7 o'clock this evening.